Chapter 645. The drumming tribe had made a big move this time. They were about to face a battle that had been delayed for 1,000 years. It was bound to affect everyone in the tribe. In order to prevent the weaker ones from getting hurt, Bo-gu went to make arrangements after leaving the shaman's house. Their core battlefield was where their tribe was located. The drumming tribe was one of the few tribes that used their own place as their battlefield. If they wanted to evacuate everyone who couldn't participate in the battle, they would have to evacuate everyone from their tribe's territory. Bo-gu's plan was to let those people leave through the Ya tribe's underground cave and then find a place to hide. The Ya people weren't strong in battle, but they were good at finding a place to hide. Bo-gu had seen the person who came out of the ground under his house before. The Ya tribe wouldn't participate in the battle, but they would help the drumming tribe send the people away. Hence, in the next 2 days, there were many pregnant women and children carrying bags going into the cave under Bo-gu's house. They would leave through the cave and the Ya tribesmen would lead the way for them. In these 2 days there were more fearsome beasts in the area, especially those patrolling at night. They could even hear the clear sound of waves coming from the riverbank. Now that the beast was no longer hiding, the drumming tribesmen wouldn't go near the riverbank. They would only guard the borders of the tribe and hunt down the beasts that intruded. On the 3rd day the drumming tribe was very quiet. There weren't any children playing around and no one was running around. When the sun was high up in the sky, the shaman walked out of his house and walked towards the fire pit. The other drumming tribesmen also came out of their houses and gathered around the fire pit. Before the hunt began, they had an important ceremony. To the drumming tribe, the net was a tool and also a religion. Perhaps people from other tribes didn't think much of a net, but every time before and after a hunt, the drumming tribe would hold a special ceremony. Just like the Flaming Horn tribe's mobilization meeting before a hunt, there would be a sword cleansing ceremony after the hunt. The drumming tribe did the same. The more important the hunt, the more complicated the ceremony was. To many tribes they only needed people, tools and strength to hunt. But the drumming tribe thought that it was more than that. For them there was one more important and necessary procedure before a major hunt, a ceremony. Without that ceremony, the people of the drumming tribe would feel that no matter how powerful you were, no matter how skillful your hunting skills were, and no matter how sharp your tools were, without a ceremony, there wouldn't be a satisfying hunt, and they wouldn't be able to achieve their goals. That ritual would bestow power to the hunting net in their hands. This power would allow them to hunt with satisfactory results. They would not miss their targets, they would capture enough prey, and all their tools would achieve the greatest effect. When it came to rituals, they would naturally mention the shaman. The shaman was the host of the ritual. All important rituals of the tribe were inseparable from the shaman. The shaman was the most important person of the ritual. Without the shaman, the ritual would not exist. The hunting net could not be given power, and the hunting operation would end miserably. It could be said that in the eyes of the drumming tribe, hunting was a witchcraft operation. The witchcraft would decide the time and method of hunting. The drumming tribe's main hunting method was net hunting. The shaman played a crucial role in net hunting, which was why the shaman of the drumming tribe had a high status, while the chief's status was far lower than the shaman's. They could do without a chief for every important operation, but they definitely couldn't do without the shaman. When the Gu shaman came to the fire pit, Bo-gu and the others were already there. Inside the fire pit, there was a pile of hunting nets that filled the fire pit. The nets piled up like a small hill, blocking the fire seed from the fire pit. They didn't burn because of the fire seed in the fire pit. If you looked closely, you would notice that the nets piled up in the fire pit were different from the ones the drumming tribe usually used. This was because the beast they were about to hunt was much stronger than the ones they usually hunted. Ordinary straw nets couldn't stop the beast's footsteps at all, let alone kill it. Therefore they used the best nets they could make this time. Every year they would gather raw materials for this kind of net during the appropriate seasons and store the hemp fibers. When it was needed, they would take out these precious materials to weave the highest level hunting net. Are you ready? The shaman shifted his gaze from the fire pit to Bo-gu and the others. Yes. Bo-gu looked at the people gathered. These were all the participants of this operation, a total of 1,300 people. More than half of them would be in charge of the outer perimeter. Most of them were beginner totemic warriors, while the other half would be in charge of the inner perimeter. Most of them were intermediate totemic warriors, while the experienced ones would be in charge of the inner perimeter. If that's the case, the Gu shaman's face turned serious. Cast the nets. Everyone lined up in a long line. This wasn't the first time they did something like this, so they didn't need to say much. Bo-gu, who was the first on the left, walked towards the fire pit. He stopped in front of the fire pit and stretched out his hand. The Gu shaman took out a long and thin leaf. The leaf was thin and brittle as if it would break if touched. The Gu Wu used 3 fingers to pinch the leaf, and with a wave of his hand, the withered leaf was like a thin, sharp knife, slicing through Bo Gu's palm. Blood followed the path of the leaf and slid down Bo Gu's hand into the fire pit. The whole process took less than a breath's time. Bo Gu stepped to the side and the second person stepped forward. Just like Bo Gu, he stretched out his hand. Everyone who participated in the battle would drip their blood into the fire pit. Even though there were 1,000 people here, it didn't take long. When the last person finished, it only took half an hour. When everyone was done, the Gu shaman flicked his finger and threw the leaf into the fire pit, sticking it on top of the hunting net that had been piled up into a small mountain. What was the meaning of the net? Subdue. Conquer. As the ceremony continued, this thought seemed to have spread out along with the net. Inside and around the Gu tribe, there were waves of restlessness. The birds that used to fly here had long left. The insects that hid behind the leaves had already spread their wings and flew away. The other reason why the Gu tribe didn't want the Yinjiao to interfere was because if the net was activated, the Yinjiao wouldn't be able to do anything. In fact, they might even leave the net. In the flaming river, the calm waves churned as if something was stirring vigorously below and was about to burst out of the water. Chapter 646. When the ceremony was over, the sun was still high up in the sky, its scorching rays shining down on the ground. The people of the drumming tribe were already covered in a layer of dense sweat, but they didn't even have the mood to wipe it off. They silently followed the tasks assigned to them and went to different places. Once the mission started, they would chase with spears, draw bows and arrows, use ropes and lassos. Everything would go according to plan. They were nervous. This would be the first time in 1,000 years that their tribe faced a beast of that level head-on. When everyone was in position, the Gu shaman stood alone by the fire pit and picked up an object. It was a hard, round object made of dense hemp fibers. It was about the size of a palm and as thick as a knuckle. This object was connected to a long handle and the Gu shaman held it in his hand. He raised his arm and pointed the object in the direction of the flaming river. He moved it slowly until he reached a certain spot. The Gu shaman paused and looked in that direction. His gaze was like a sharp knife, piercing through the forest and shooting towards the flaming river. The Gu shaman maintained his position and did not move. The net that was piled up in the fire pit behind him had already been taken away. There was only a small flame in the empty fire pit, like a flower blooming in the middle of a flower bed. Whoosh, the flame flickered. Then there was the sound of waves crashing against the shore from the flaming river. The sound of water splashing against the forest could be heard too. It's here. The Gu shaman tightened his grip on the handle again. He was nervous too, but as a shaman he couldn't panic. He had to stay calm. The reason why he decided to make a move today was because he predicted that today would be the best day to make a move. The weather was fine and there was no rain, so it wouldn't interfere with their movements. The air humidity was just right, neither too humid nor too dry. This would allow the soldiers to maintain their best condition. Most importantly, the success rate of attacking on this day was the highest. As the saying goes, the right time, the right place, and the right people were all indispensable. The beast wouldn't come out during the day. Even if it didn't want to wait any longer, it would choose to attack at night. However, the Gu tribe was greatly restricted at night, so the shaman had no choice but to lure the beast over at this time of the day. The method he used to lure the beast out was just a secret technique of the drumming tribe to increase the hatred in the beast's heart. Once the hatred in its heart multiplied, the beast's caution would no longer be able to hold back its anger and it would lose its rationality. The sound of splashing water grew louder and louder. Even though the trees were blocking their view, the Gu shaman could still guess what was happening by the riverbank from the sound of the splashing water. The first step, lure, was a success. The Gu shaman let out a sigh of relief, but he didn't dare to let his guard down. His eyes were still fixated on the beast, his fingers were trembling. This wasn't something he could control, this step required a lot of energy. Against such a beast he could only do his best. Boom. A tremor could be heard from the ground. Boom. 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 The trembling grew louder and more urgent. It was on land. Even though the forest on this side of the flaming river was dense, it couldn't compare to the ancient forest on the other side of the river. Due to the tribe's efforts to survive, there weren't many ancient trees here. This kind of forest was an obstacle for the giant beasts. It couldn't even move through the gaps in the forest. The beast's huge body charged forward like an armored car, knocking down all the obstacles in its path and stepping on them. Taking a deep breath, the Gu shaman spat out a word, chase. The voice wasn't loud. Generally speaking, people who were a little far away couldn't hear it at all. But at this time, the warriors of the drumming tribe who were lying in ambush all heard this command. The word chase rang in their minds. Bogu hid in the forest and watched as the beast finally showed itself. A drop of sweat rolled down his forehead and his heart pounded. This was the first time he had encountered such a huge beast. He had seen beast horns in Yanjiao's flaming river trading point, but even if they still had traces of the beast's aura, they were still dead. No matter how shocked he was, he didn't panic. And now they were facing a living, powerful giant dire beast. Don't panic, stay calm, stay calm. Bogu's trembling arm quickly calmed down. He drew the bow and released the arrow in one go without any hesitation or doubt. He was as confident and decisive as he used to be when he hunted. The Gu tribe warriors who were hiding in the forest followed suit after Bogu's attack. Many of them were still intimidated by the beast, but it didn't matter. This was just the beginning. No matter how hard it was, they had to face it. This beast had been using the smaller beasts to test them. Weren't they using the beast's caution to improve themselves? The small beasts that appeared a few days ago allowed them to get used to it. They now knew how to deal with beasts. They weren't like their ancestors from 1,000 years ago. They didn't have much experience with beasts. If it wasn't for the disaster last year, they would have continued to be isolated from the beasts. But now they had to face a new environment. This was their first hurdle. Gritting their teeth, the people of the drumming tribe adjusted their totemic power to the peak, trying their best to stimulate all the power in their bodies. Dozens of figures darted through the forest like shooting stars. Every time they moved, there would be arrows aimed at the giant beast that seemed to have cast a solid shield all over its body. Da, 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 da. The arrows hit the beast's body and made metallic sounds. The behemoth's slightly long neck seemed to be a flaw, but it was still tightly protected by its armor-like scales, which made it easy for hunters to choose to attack. The stone arrowheads hit the beast's scales. The arrowheads broke and the arrows were blocked. The beast's body was unscathed. At most, there were only some light scratches. The beast shook its head to avoid the arrows aimed at its eyes. Its pupils were sharp and cold like a sword. It looked around with madness and anger. After being angered by the Gu shaman, it looked even more ferocious. Every single scale on its body seemed to exude a thick murderous aura. In its half-open mouth, its sharp teeth tore apart the tree branches that it was biting. The tree branches became extremely fragile and were easily crushed. With just one move, the people of the Gu tribe knew that there was a huge difference in power between the two sides. If they used the traditional hunting method, it wouldn't be a battle to the death. It wasn't easy to succeed. Chapter 647. A sharp roar like the friction between rocks could be heard. The forest seemed to be pushed outwards by an unintentional hand. The stone arrowheads constantly clanged as they struck the giant beast's body, but the giant beast simply raised its front paw, completely ignoring the dense barrage of sharp stone arrowheads, and pushed down all the trees in its way, venting the anger in its body. Bogu realized that the beast's paw wasn't complete. It looked a little deformed, as if it was cut by someone. Yes, it was this paw. Thousands of years ago, when the ancestors of the drumming tribe were hunting this beast, although it escaped, it left behind half of its paw. Now this beast's paw had healed, but it couldn't grow back completely. Even if it grew back a little, it didn't have the shape of a beast's paw. It looked very strange. This paw, compared to a normal paw, was weaker in terms of agility and attack. Perhaps the giant beast also realized why its paw was like this. It roared angrily again and chased after the people who were hiding in the forest and shooting arrows everywhere. Bogu and the others continued to shoot while luring the beast towards the tribe. If it was any other beast, they would chase it from the back. But for this beast, they couldn't stay at the back. They could only continue to lure it from the front. Here they were the weaker party. The beast was the stronger party. Kacha, kacha, kacha. A road was opened up in the forest. Broken wood chips and broken leaves scattered. Trees were lifted far away, leaving only some pits on the ground after being lifted up by the roots or remnants of tree trunks that were still in place after being cut in half. This beast wasn't this big 1,000 years ago. It should be about the same size as the small fearsome beast they met a few days ago. The hunting methods their ancestors used back then were naturally different from now. So, the beast wasn't familiar with the hunting methods the drumming tribe used now. Even if it was 1,000 years ago, it couldn't remember it clearly. Moreover, the probing of the drumming tribe had ended. It believed that the drumming tribe would not pose too much of a threat. Even if it still remembered the grudge from 1,000 years ago, even if there was still a trace of fear in the depths of its heart, but now, all the fear had turned into hatred and anger. Plus, it was angered by the witch. It couldn't think of anything else now. Kill. That was the only thought in its mind. In front, they could already see the drumming tribe's house. Trap. A voice rang in Bogu and the others' minds. It was time for the next step. So. Ropes appeared from all directions. Up, down, front, back, left, right, all 6 directions. At the same time, a net suddenly sprung up from under the giant beast's feet. The dust and leaves covering the net were blown away. The moment the giant beast lifted its foot, the net closed and directly bound the beast's claw. The giant beast that was charging forward was suddenly pulled back by the sudden force, but it was only for a moment. The beast swung its claws vigorously, lifting up a forest not far away. The rope from the net was tied to the trees. The warriors of the drumming tribe who were hiding in the forest were exposed as the trees were torn down. They had no choice but to retreat and set up a net in a hurry. The net just now was only one of the nets that had been set up. There were more behind it. One net wouldn't be able to achieve much. They needed more nets. This giant beast had already fallen into their net area. They had to keep circling the ropes around it. The ropes formed a net and the nets formed a net. One net after another connected to the other. If Xiaoxian was here, he would definitely see that this was similar to the chain lasso he set up in the trap. It was just more complicated. If the chain lasso was like changing from 1 dimension to 2 dimensions, from beginner to intermediate complexity, then the net was like changing from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions, from intermediate to advanced complexity. If a person wanted to create a net and ensure its success, as long as they mastered the technique and had enough time and energy, it wasn't too difficult. After all, only one's consciousness was in charge of the operation. But now, the people of the drumming tribe, the 100 or so people in charge of the net, had successfully completed the huge net without any commands. Even if there were conflicts between them, they were now cooperating very well. This was a temporary tacit understanding, which was impossible for other tribes to achieve. In addition, look at the weaved nets. The trees were easily torn apart, but most of the nets were still connected. The ropes were rarely broken. The net wrapped around the beast's feet was faintly red. It wasn't very thick, but it was unusually strong even if the beast was strong. This was the net after the net ceremony. It was also the net that the drumming tribe used to deal with difficult targets. 1,000 years ago, the ancestors of the drumming tribe often used this net. But in the past 1,000 years, the drumming tribe rarely used it. After all, the fearsome beasts were slowly disappearing, and their daily targets were just some ferocious beasts. There was no need to use this net anymore. Now, after 1,000 years, the drumming tribe was using this net again. More and more nets wrapped around the beast's feet, and more ropes were wrapped around the beast's body. The ropes weren't obvious compared to the beast's size, but they were still increasing. With every step the beast took, more ropes would wrap around it. These troublesome nets and the smell of the ropes reminded it of bad memories from a long time ago. When it thought of its half-chopped claw, it couldn't help but become more irritable. The Gu shaman looked at the giant beast and shouted again, "Capture!" Bo Gu attacked from the back of the beast, his totemic power infused into his arms. The veins on his arms bulged like dragons as he swung his sword down. The sword emitted a suffocating cold light as it landed heavily on the beast's neck. If it was in the past, the beast's head would have been chopped off easily. Even the fearsome beasts from a few days ago couldn't survive this strike. Such a large beast should have been injured by this strike, right? However, when the blade collided with the beast, a sharp screeching sound could be heard. Bo Gu felt his entire arm go numb from the impact. He looked at the area where the blade had touched. Only a few scratches could be seen. There was no trace of blood. This strike didn't even cut through the beast's skin. Not only that, Bo Gu could feel that the sword in his hand couldn't be used anymore. There were already cracks on the sword's body. Bo Gu was shocked when he heard this. The other drumming tribesmen who saw this were also shocked. Most of their stone tools were above average and some were even made from high-quality stones. But this scene told them that their stone tools were useless. Was this a scam? But no matter what, even though they knew their stone tools weren't effective against the beast, they still had to continue with their plan. At the same time, in the flaming river, 2 boats that were supposed to sail downstream were now heading upstream. Chapter 648. In the Gu tribe, there were many nets tied around the beast, but these nets alone were not enough to stop it from moving forward. It was impossible to capture it with these nets. In order to set up more nets, the people of the drumming tribe who were responsible for setting up the nets paid a heavy price. Dozens of people died or were injured. The rest of the people could only hold on and try their best to set up more nets. the number of casualties would only increase. Facing a beast of this level, getting heavily injured was already the best result. The Gu shaman looked at the approaching giant beast, and his calm eyes couldn't help but show signs of worry. Not enough. Still not enough. If he wanted to achieve the desired result, the net that he had set up now was not complete enough. Even if he was prepared, the shaman still underestimated the beast's ability. The people in charge of the nets had already tried their best, so he could not blame them anymore. In the end, it was because they were inexperienced. Facing a beast of this level, although they were not flustered, they were not efficient enough and missed many opportunities. The Gu shaman stared intently at the approaching giant beast, searching it for any signs of life. Was it done? No, there was still a gap. That gap had to be filled or else it would not achieve its goal. Fill the gap. Two Gu tribe warriors took the chance to attack, each with a rope. However, although they were fast, the giant beast's reaction was faster than theirs. The beast's paw, which was as big as a roof, swept over with a whistling sound. The two of them wanted to dodge, but they found that their escape route had been blocked by the giant beast's other paw. Even if they managed to dodge one of the beast's paws, they would not be able to dodge the other. Without any chance to escape, they were swept away by the paw. Like two meteors, they flew into the forest, leaving a trail of blood in the air. It was too late. The people in charge of the nets were already at their limit. The shaman looked at the approaching beast and could only bring forward the last step. Yes, they didn't have any stronger and sharper weapons to attack. They also didn't have the flaming horn tribe's strength that was comparable to fearsome beasts. Their net couldn't trap this giant beast that was already in a frenzy, but they still had one last method. It was the drumming tribe's trump card in case of emergency. Burn. Whoosh, the net around the giant beast suddenly burst into flames. The behemoth's head, neck, torso, limbs, and everywhere where the net rope was tied, flames burst out of it. The flames seemed to originate from the rope net, but the rope net that withstood the flames was not as damaged as the burning firewood. The rope net still maintained its original appearance, but its color was a little redder. Lead, chase, trap, capture, burn, these were the general steps of the drumming tribe's hunting. But most of the time they would not use the last step, especially after the appearance of the Great River 1,000 years ago, which separated the area where the fearsome beasts lived, so the last step was rarely used. Even if there was a ferocious beast, they didn't need to use the last step to deal with it. Thousands of years ago, when the ancestors of the drumming tribe hunted this ferocious beast, they didn't use the last step. Unfortunately, after 1,000 years, this beast had grown to this level, forcing them to use the last step. Most of the warriors of the drumming tribe had never experienced a situation where they had to use the last step. This was their first time participating in a battle. The ancient fire seed scent filled the area, especially the beast wrapped in the rope net. Other than the fire pit, the ancient fire seed scent was the strongest. The ancient fire seed had a protective effect on the tribesmen, but to the fearsome beasts, it was a natural deterrent. Almost at the same time, the roars of the beasts in the distance all stopped. The only beast that was still standing was the beast that was very close to the fire pit. On the beast's body, even the best stone tools couldn't break through its skin. It was slowly turning black in the flames. This was the power of the ancient fire seed. The scorching pain made the beast stop in its tracks and roar in pain. The shockwave in the air blew the roof off the house. It worked. It worked. Bogu and the others were happy. The heavy stone in their hearts seemed to have been lifted. However, before they could breathe a sigh of relief, the situation changed again. A ferocious glint appeared in the giant beast's eyes, which were filled with killing intent. It let out another long howl, and the scales all over its body bulged. The air waves that surged out from its body seemed to shoot out from the gaps in its scales, which were difficult to detect with the naked eye. This change only happened in an instant, and a sharp whistle-like sound rang out and then stopped. Bogu and the others who were controlling the rope net felt a strong force coming from the vine net. Danger. Just as this thought flashed through their minds, the next moment, the sound of bones breaking could be heard. Blood spurted out from the hand holding the net. Even the bones could be seen. Bang. The sound of the rope breaking could be heard. The first part of the rope that broke was the gap that the shaman thought he couldn't fix. It was as if a chain reaction had started, spreading from the gap to other parts of the net. Bang. 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 The sound of the rope breaking could be heard continuously. The sound of the rope breaking was like a firecracker with a lit fuse. It was so loud that people couldn't focus. The net broke off from the beast's body and flew in all directions. Many of the Gu tribesmen were hit by the net. How? How is this possible? Bogu couldn't believe what he was seeing. This beast actually broke free. The Gu tribe's burn technique was known as the ultimate technique. Now after it was used, its target broke free. Bo Gu and the others were shocked. The beast's cold eyes scanned the surroundings and finally fixed on the figure in front of the fire pit. Bang! The beast's paw smashed into the ground, causing the ground to crack and dust to fly everywhere. With another deafening roar, the giant beast stomped its feet on the ground, ready to charge in that direction with an imposing aura that seemed capable of killing any beast that stood in its way and killing any god that stood in its way. Whoosh! The sound of something breaking through the air was suddenly heard. The beast's head was knocked to the side by the sudden powerful impact, and the momentum that the giant beast had just accumulated was suddenly interrupted. A green spear stabbed into the beast's head. To be exact, it stabbed into the beast's face, below its eyelids and above its mouth. It almost pierced its eyes. The green spear's handle was as thick as an adult's arm. It was made from an unknown tree. The spearhead was a strange green color. Under the hot sun, it shone with a cold luster. Pucci, dark red blood spurted out from the wound. Then more blood flowed down the spear's handle. Previously, the drumming tribe couldn't break the hide with their stone tools, but this spear did it. The beast's attention was attracted by the spear. Perhaps it didn't expect that it would be injured by a human's weapon. Chapter 649. The giant beast turned its head away from the impact and looked towards the direction where the spear came from instead of the Gu shaman at the fire pit. There was an eagle in the sky over there. The giant beast that was interrupted let out a dissatisfied roar in that direction. But the eagle continued to roar in provocation. It didn't move closer or leave, it just hovered there. The giant beast's throat let out a deep rumbling sound like thunder. It was angry. If it could, it wanted to tear the eagle to pieces, but it could not go up to the sky. The sudden appearance of the spear stunned the Gu tribesmen. They didn't have spears like that in their tribe. If they did, they would have used it long ago. They had seen similar weapons on the Yanjiao tribesmen before. The Yanjiao tribesmen who came to their tribe a few days ago had green weapons like this. Looking at the eagle in the sky, the Yanjiao tribesmen who came a few days ago also had eagles. It's them? The Yanjiao tribesmen? Didn't they leave? Why would they appear here? The Gu tribesmen were only guessing. But the Gu shaman was sure that it was the Yanjiao tribesmen. He could feel the fire seed's energy from the Yanjiao tribesmen hiding in the forest. Although the aura of an outsider made them feel uneasy, fortunately the other party seemed to be on their side and had helped them. Whoosh! Another spear pierced the giant beast's body, but because the giant beast was now prepared, it dodged and avoided the vital parts. The spear was originally aimed at its eyes, but it pierced its forehead, which was the hardest part of its head. This spear pierced the skin, but it did not bleed because it did not pierce deep enough. The first spear's accuracy was affected by the flying rocks and debris, and the second spear also missed because of the giant beast's defense. But there was no doubt that these two consecutive spears surprised the giant beast and made it very irritable. The skin was broken, the skin was broken. This was the first time the beast had bled since it appeared. The tribesmen who were too close to the beast didn't retreat in time. Now that the beast was distracted, they retreated without hesitation. Bo Gu's arm was injured because he was too close to the beast. His legs were also fractured when the beast slammed its claws into the ground. He couldn't move freely. He wanted to retreat, but the moment he moved, he couldn't control his body and fell backwards. Before Bo Gu fell to the ground, a hand grabbed him by the back of his shirt and threw him far away. Bo Gu was speechless. This was definitely not someone from the Gu tribe. Bo Gu looked at the person who threw him and his eyes widened. The great elder of Yanjiao? The person who threw Bo Gu was Xiao Xian, but Xiao Xian didn't throw it blindly. There were drumming tribesmen in that direction, so they would naturally catch Bo Gu. Boom. The giant beast's powerful stomps made the already cracked ground even more messy, as if the open wounds were being unscrupulously pulled, making it look even more terrifying. Xiao Xian had already leapt backwards to avoid the tremors from the ground even before the beast stomped on him. He used a rope from the drumming tribe to turn his body in the air and move towards another direction. He couldn't always stay in one place, he had to constantly change his position. He was the one who threw the first spear. He couldn't retrieve the spear from the beast's body as it was too risky. The beast was already prepared and wouldn't let him get close to it. With its size, strength and attacks, one touch from it would be enough to make a person fall to the ground. Xiao Xian wasn't confident that he could dodge all of the beast's attacks, so he wasn't in a hurry to retrieve his spear. They didn't have any more bronze spears for them to stab. Luckily, they had already attracted the beast's attention and bought some time for the Gu tribesmen to catch their breath. "Why are you all here?" Bogu asked the nearest flaming horn tribesman as he was led away by his tribesmen. Our great elder said that you might need our help. That's why we're here. Tua stared at the giant beast without moving his eyes away. Why would your great elder think so? Because he's the great elder. Bogu didn't know how to continue asking. He couldn't guess what the Yinjiao tribesmen were thinking. He didn't know why they would appear here when they had already sailed downstream. However, they were grateful that the Yinjiao tribe was willing to help them. The truth was that the Yinjiao tribesmen wanted to return and see what kind of beast the Gu tribesmen were fighting. They also wanted to understand the Gu tribe's fighting style and fighting style. After that, Xiao Xian made a knot and led the others to jump to the bow of the ship, turning back. The shaman looked towards Xiao Xian's direction. He didn't have time to thank them, so he made another decision. Fix it. The Gu tribesmen took a deep breath and started moving again. The battle wasn't over yet. The giant beast had broken through many of the nets, but not all of them. There were still many nets wrapped around its body. However, those nets alone could not be used to their fullest potential. They had to connect all the nets together and fill in the gaps to completely subdue the giant beast. Bogu's position was taken by someone else, so he couldn't fight anymore. He could only watch from the sidelines. Do you need any help? Tura asked. No, thank you for your help. We'll be fine from now on, Bogu said. The Yinjiao tribesmen appeared at the most crucial moment and gave the Gu tribesmen time to breathe. What they needed to do now was to follow the shaman's orders and fix the broken nets. But would they really succeed? Bogu was anxious. Although they had already set up the nets, they would be more skillful this time. This was the Gu tribesmen's talent, and Bogu didn't doubt it. However, not to mention how many people were injured and their movements were restricted. Just looking at the giant beast's current position, Bogu's heart couldn't be at ease. It was too close. The beast had already entered the Gu tribe's territory. There wasn't much time left. You really don't need help? Tua asked again. Actually, they really wanted to help. It was rare to meet such a beast. Although they weren't confident in killing it, they could at least test it out and then run. In the forest, if they met a beast they couldn't defeat, they would do the same thing. Bogu shook his head and said firmly, You guys can't. Although this made Tua and the others unhappy, they had to admit that in this situation they couldn't do anything. Firstly, the Gu tribe's fire seed's energy was too strong. The closer they got, the more they would be affected. They would have to use some of their energy to resist the fire seed's repulsion. Facing such a dangerous beast, if they couldn't fight it with all their might, it was better to be careful. Years of hunting experience told them that if they were careless, they could lose their lives. Plus, the beast was attacking the Gu tribe, not the Yinjiao tribe. They didn't need to fight so hard. They could just help from the side. Secondly, looking at the Gu tribesmen's actions, although there were many of them, it felt like they were one entity. If they acted rashly, not only would they not be able to help, they would also interfere with the Gu tribe's plan. Thinking about this, Tua and the others didn't move forward. They only helped a few injured Gu tribesmen out of the battlefield. They could only help so much. No one could blame the Yinjiao tribesmen. Compared to other tribes, the Yinjiao tribe was already considered kind. For now, they could just watch from the sidelines. Wait, something's not right. Tua shivered. Their leader, the Great Elder, didn't seem to have returned yet. Chapter 650. Xiao Xian remained on the battlefield. It wasn't that Xiao Xian was a busybody, he just wanted to help to buy some time for the Gu tribesmen to catch their breaths. Since Bogu was injured, he wanted to help as well. Among all the Yinjiao tribesmen here, Xiao Xian was the least affected by the Gu tribe's fire seed. That was why he went deeper into the battlefield. When he saw the Gu tribesmen catch their breaths and prepare to fight again, he wanted to retreat from the battlefield. But after a few steps he heard a voice. Wait. There was no one around Xiao Xian. The voice wasn't loud, but it was clear as if someone was talking to him. It was the Gu shaman's voice. It was a secret technique that allowed Xiao Xian to stay and help them. Maybe the shaman saw that Xiao Xian wasn't affected by the Gu tribe's fire seed. He was also strong. After seeing the two spears, the shaman was sure that only Yinjiao tribesmen could hurt the beast with weapons. The shaman even promised that if Xiao Xian helped them this time, the Gu tribesmen would repay the Yinjiao tribe. As for what benefits they would give, the situation was too dangerous for them to discuss. Xiao Xian agreed. The shaman would tell Xiao Xian when to attack. Front claw. Xiao Xian lowered his body abruptly, as if he was sliding on the ground, towards the beast's claw that was propped up on the ground. The beast was looking in another direction. Taking this chance, Xiao Xian slashed at the beast's claw. A golden light flashed. Clang. The sound of metal colliding rang out, followed by an ear-piercing explosion. Shards of scales with a metallic luster broke away from the beast's paw and splashed in all directions. A mark was left on the tough, armor-like beast's skin and scales. As for Xiao Xian's hand that was holding the sword, he only felt waves of burning numbness from his wrist to his shoulder. That was Xiao Xian's first thought. He didn't feel it when he threw the spear, but now he felt the recoil from the sword. Xiao Xian could feel the beast's strong defense. No matter if it was a strong blow or a sharp blade, it would be greatly weakened when it came into contact with the beast's tough scales. With such a strong defense, even if 200 Yanjiao tribesmen attacked at once, this beast would still be able to hold on for a while. This beast, Xiao Xian's heart skipped a beat. Perhaps it was not obvious just by looking at its size and reaction speed, but he felt that this beast had already surpassed the average fearsome beast. Even the largest fearsome beast they had hunted for the Flaming River Grand Banquet paled in comparison to this beast. Xiao Xian couldn't help but think of the Bat King he met years ago. Back then the bat was extremely fast. The Flaming Horn hunting team couldn't even catch a glimpse of its shadow. This giant beast in front of them wasn't a speed-type beast. It wasn't agile compared to other fearsome beasts of the same level. It couldn't fly and it didn't have many other ways to attack. In terms of strength, it might not even be as strong as some of the giant beasts the Flaming Horns had hunted before. However, this giant beast was much stronger than the fearsome beasts the Flaming Horns had hunted before. Perhaps it wasn't as strong as the bat Xiao Xian had met years ago, but it was enough to strike fear into people's hearts. Its defensive capabilities were simply too strong. Generally speaking, an excessively long neck would appear fragile. However, the dense steel armor-like scales protected it tightly. No wonder it was a fearsome beast that had lived for 1,000 years. The Gu shaman didn't know what Xiao Xian was thinking. Even though he was focused on the beast and the Gu tribesmen fixing the net, he still spared a bit of attention to Xiao Xian. He saw the result of Xiao Xian's attack. What a sharp weapon. The Gu shaman's eyes flashed with surprise. He didn't know what material it was made of. Where did the Yanjiao get it? Whether it was the 2 spears from before or Xiao Xian's weapon, which was completely different from a stone tool, the Gu shaman was shocked. What a monster. But it was a pity. No matter how sharp Yanjiao's weapons were, they couldn't subdue this fearsome beast. Only the Gu tribesmen could do it. The Yanjiao tribesmen could only support them. The skin on the beast's claws was too thick, much thicker than the skin on its face. Even though Xiao Xian's wound was deep enough, it wasn't enough to cause blood to spurt out. It didn't even cause the beast much pain. Compared to the beast's size, a wound like this was nothing. But even so, the beast was still distracted. Its head tilted towards Xiao Xian. After that strike, Xiao Xian dodged to the side without hesitation. In the next moment, the beast raised its paw and stomped down heavily. The stones on the ground were crushed into powder. The ground cracked and caved in. The tremors spread outwards, causing the cracks to widen even further. The original habitat of the drumming tribe had been destroyed beyond recognition after being trampled by the beasts again and again. Outside the battle circle, Guang was holding a strong bow that was almost as tall as her. She aimed an arrow at the giant beast, but she didn't dare to shoot recklessly. She wanted to shoot a few arrows with the other archers, but they soon realized that it wasn't easy to do so. There were people from the drumming tribe everywhere, and they were worried about accidentally injuring them. The Grand Elder told us not to attack for now. We just need to take care of the injured. Kuan Tu looked over worriedly. They weren't worried about the Gu tribe. All they cared about was Xiao Xian. Brother Xian isn't an impulsive person. He knows what he's doing. We just need to watch from the side. If Brother Xian asks us to attack, we'll go over. Guang put down her bow but didn't put the arrow back into the quiver. She was ready to shoot at any given signal. At the battlefield, Xiao Xian once again left a sword mark on the beast's hind leg that wasn't covered by the net under the Gu shaman's instructions. There was some blood this time, but it wasn't enough to cause any real damage to the beast. Xiao Xian wanted to cut a few more times on the same wound to completely cut open the beast's skin, but he didn't have the time and the beast was prepared. Every time the wound appeared, it would close up within a few breaths of time and the blood would stop flowing. Its scales would close up as if it was trying to cover the wound. It was difficult for Xiao Xian to accurately cut the same wound. Plus, he was cooperating with the drumming tribe, he wasn't in charge of the operation. Giving up on the idea of deepening the wound, Xiao Xian observed the Gu tribesmen who were busy setting up the net while waiting for the shaman's next instruction. To be honest, if one didn't know how to set up nets, traps, they wouldn't be able to understand their actions. Hundreds of silhouettes shuttled around the beast. The straw ropes were like strange red snakes, intertwining, gathering and forming knots. Then, like a seal, they stuck tightly to the beast's body. If the person fixing the net was slapped away by the beast, the person behind would quickly replace him. The originally messy and incomplete net was broken into whole pieces with the appearance of each net. The broken nets connected, and then flames emerged from the ropes, leaving new burn marks on the giant beast's body. Why did he take the risk to help? Xiao Xian actually had his own motives. This was the first time that he had come into close contact with such a huge and complicated net. Hearing about it was one thing, seeing the finished product was another, and seeing the whole process up close was another. The shock that he felt was something that the first two experiences could not achieve. One rope after another and one net after another. The torn net was being mended. Although their bronze weapons could barely break through the beast's scales, they couldn't do much damage in a short period of time. The only thing holding the beast back was still the Gu tribe's net. This was because the net that had already wrapped around the giant beast was like a seal that had been placed on it, causing the giant beast's movements to become more and more restricted. Xiao Xian didn't see the beast rush out from the river bank, but he could guess with his imagination that when the beast first rushed out from the river bank, it was still very fast. Now it was much slower, as if all the muscles on its body had been burned stiff by the flames on the net. The steel-like scales all over its body had been burned black by the flames. The defense that couldn't be broken by sharp weapons was beginning to collapse under the flames. This was just a broken net, not yet complete. If the Gu tribe's plan was completed, would it be the death of this beast that had lived for thousands of years? A long time ago, when Xiao Xian was learning traps from Old Ku had told him about a set of sure kill skills. At that time, Xiao Xian thought he had grasped the knack of it, but now he found that his understanding was too limited. These skills of the Gu tribe were the real sure kill skills that could subdue a ferocious beast. Rather than calling it a sure kill set, it was more accurate to call it a sure kill net. It was a more precise, complicated and powerful sure kill skill. But the premise was that the net had to be complete. Bang bang bang. The beast stood up, its two front claws reaching for its neck. As it roared in anger, its claws tore the unfinished net off its neck. The Gu tribe warrior controlling the net was also shocked by the vibration of the rope in his hand. The rope fell from his hand and his body flew out. The broken net of ropes flew down, still carrying with it a flame that had not yet been extinguished. A small section of the rope flew towards Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian raised his hand to grab the rope. The rope became even redder because of the flames, making a sizzling sound in Xiao Xian's hand. The burning pain came. The foreign tribe's fire seed's breath entered his body through his arm. Xiao Xian's hand holding the rope was burned. But soon the repulsion of the foreign tribe's fire seed faded. The rope in Xiao Xian's hand was still burning. Although the fire was getting smaller, it still persisted. However, the burning in his hand stopped. It was as if the foreign tribe's fire seed's repulsion towards Xiao Xian had stopped. In Xiao Xian's mind, the totemic flame was very active when it first came into contact with the rope. It was a natural repulsion and resistance between two fire seeds. But soon it was the light shield outside that became active. As the light shield lit up, the Yinjiao fire seed in Xiao Xian's body and the Gu tribe's fire seed in the rope in his hand both became gentle. It was as if both sides had calmed down. Xiao Xian carefully looked at the rope in his hand that was still burning. The red on the rope quickly faded, and the flame also weakened. The red on the rope was blood. Blood and fire came from the same source. With blood as a guide and rope as a medium, he borrowed the power of the fire seed to fight against a stronger enemy. So that was it. Chapter 651. Just as the net was about to be completed, the giant beast tore another hole in the net. This was undoubtedly one disaster after another. Even if the giant beast paid a price for this, with many burns on its claws and even one of its toes burned off, it was still a heavy blow to the drumming tribe. They didn't have much time left. Although the net they set up was already doing its best to hinder the giant beast's advance, even if the speed was slow, the giant beast still moved forward. The shaman didn't show any signs of panic, but if you looked closely, you would notice a hint of impatience in his eyes. But as the leader of the Gu tribe, he couldn't panic. He was the core of this operation, so he had to act confident. Faster, faster, faster. The shaman roared in his heart, but he wasn't as calm as he looked. Boom. The beast took another step forward, tearing at the net on its neck. Its claws were already injured, and this injury was even worse than Xiao Xian's sword. After tearing at the net twice, the beast's stamina was greatly depleted. In terms of stamina, the Gu tribesmen couldn't beat this beast. Its strong defense was its best bet, and now it had the upper hand. If they didn't fix the net in time, the beast would rush to the fire pond. Even if it couldn't destroy the Gu tribe's fire seed, as long as it could injure the shaman or even kill him, it would win this battle. After that, it could even kill all the Gu tribesmen here, and the Gu tribesmen wouldn't be able to resist it anymore. The beast went crazy again. Its claws tore at the ground, and with every strike, the beast would take a big step forward. It didn't care about anything else, just charge forward. Maybe it knew that it didn't need to pay the price of injuring its claws 3 more times to tear at the net. All it needed to do was to charge forward. It rushed to the side of the fire pit, where the aura that it had always feared and hated for 1,000 years was, and killed everyone standing there as well as the people around it. The shaman's calm face cracked and he couldn't even maintain his composure anymore. Not enough. Still not enough. It was too late. With his ability to foresee 100 steps ahead, how could he not have foreseen the cruel result that would follow if this progress was to continue? Big drops of sweat rolled down the shaman's forehead, his eyes were bloodshot, and the muscles on his face twitched from clenching his teeth too hard. What should he do? What should he do? Just as the shaman was trying to think of a solution, a voice came. Do we just need to fix that gap? Xiao Xian didn't have the Gu shaman's secret voice transmission technique, so he could only shout. The Gu shaman clearly heard Xiao Xian's words as the beast's claws stomped on the ground. Although he didn't know why Xiao Xian asked, he still answered. Yes. No matter what method you use, what kind of net? Yes. Gu Wu wanted to scream out loud as well. If they could complete the entire net, they would have succeeded. He was also confident that he could burn this giant beast to death here. However, if they couldn't fix the net, they might not be able to kill the beast even if they risked their lives. At that moment, the shaman's mind was filled with the words complete the web. That was why he answered Xiao Xian's question without hesitation. Xiao Xian whistled and shouted to Tua and the others who were standing on the other side of the woods, "Throw my bag over here." The flames on the fearsome beast's body skyrocketed and the drumming tribe's fire seed's aura became denser. Even the flaming horns who were standing outside the battlefield could clearly feel the unbearable, scorching waves. Hearing Xiao Xian's words, Tua and the others didn't know what Xiao Xian wanted to do, but they still did as Xiao Xian said. Dali threw a bag over. The beast and the Gu tribesmen didn't care about Xiao Xian anymore. Xiao Xian opened the bag and took out the thing inside. "Xian, what are you doing?" Wei and Tua, who were worried about Xiao Xian, were shocked to see Xiao Xian cut his arm. "It's okay, don't worry, I won't do anything stupid." Xiao Xian's hands moved faster. Wei's heart jumped to his throat when he heard Xiao Xian's words. As the second in command of Ta's advance party, Wei had experienced the consequences of Xiao Xian's "don't worry, I won't do anything stupid." Grand Elder. Wei's voice trembled. They didn't need to take the risk for the Gu tribe. "I know what I'm doing, I'm not doing it blindly. Also, I want to prove something. Don't come near." After that, Xiao Xian carried the things he packed and ran towards the beast. Fix the net where? Right now, the biggest gap was probably the neck that had just been torn open by the giant beast. Looking at the beast getting closer and closer, Xiao Xian took a deep breath. His fingers suddenly exploded with power. He didn't just increase his strength. Every time he made a move, he calculated it in his mind. 2 palm-sized boomerangs flew out with a thin string, drawing a curved arc in the air and circling around the giant beast's neck. Fortunately, the giant beast didn't care about the string that had circled around it. Xiao Xian bent his knees and jumped up to catch the boomerangs. Then he changed the angle and direction and shot out again. He was fixing the net. As the Gu tribesmen who were familiar with the net, they understood Xiao Xian's actions. They were grateful, but what was the use? If an electric wire was broken somewhere in the middle, it would be fine to connect it with another piece of electric wire, and it would still be electrified. But what if it was a non-conductive wire? Could the wire be connected? That was absolutely impossible. But now, in the eyes of the drumming tribe, even if Xiao Xian had filled in the gaps, whether or not he could form a net, and whether or not the net was strong was another matter. Based on the threads that Xiao Xian took out, it was impossible to succeed. If the Gu tribesmen wanted to kill the beast in one fell swoop, they had to use the Gu tribe's net, and it had to be a ritual net. Only that kind of net could be ignited by the fire seed. Other nets, no matter how good the material was, would not be ignited by the fire seed. Why didn't they give some of the net to the Yinjiao? Many of the Gu tribesmen were filled with regret. The shaman finally understood Xiao Xian's plan, but it was too late. Could he ignite the net too? The shaman couldn't help but feel hopeful. No, impossible, definitely impossible. The shaman immediately rejected that idea. Without the fire seed, how could he ignite the net? The shaman's eyes flashed with determination. Retreat. It was too late, he could only use all his strength to use the fire seed's power to injure the beast. Even if he had to risk his life, he had to stop it. Even if he couldn't kill it, he just had to injure it heavily. If it was heavily injured, the Gu tribesmen would have a higher chance of escaping. If it was heavily injured, the beast would not be able to kill them. This beast alone would not be able to destroy their fire seed. As long as the fire seed was still there, their tribesmen would still have a chance to make a comeback. Without the shaman, they might need to spend more time to train a new one, but as long as there was a chance, it was fine. Hearing the shaman's words, the Gu tribesmen knew what he was planning. Some of them wanted to fight the beast but were stopped by the shaman. If they charged forward, they would be slapped to death by the beast. There was no need for them to sacrifice their lives. The shaman flipped the wooden handle in his hand, the pancake facing down. His other hand held onto the bottom of the pancake was still facing the beast. He was chanting something, preparing for the final attack. Screech! A sharp, metallic sound rang out, piercing everyone's eardrums. It even interrupted the shaman's chanting. The Gu tribesmen who didn't want to leave had to cover their ears. Their faces twisted as they looked towards the source of the sound. They saw the messy threads around the beast's neck changing at an extremely fast speed. They intertwined and tightened. It was as if the messy threads had turned into a sturdy net. The threads flashed red under Yang Guang's hands. Xiao Xian held onto one end of the thread, the other end was already tied into a knot. As Xiao Xian pulled, the other end was pulled closer to the beast's neck. The threads around the beast's neck tightened. The ear-piercing sound was the sound of the silk thread rubbing against the armor-like scales on the beast's neck as it tightened. Seeing Xiao Xian's actions, everyone's hearts jumped. What was that Yin Jiao trying to do? There was no hope of fixing the net. Even if he could fix it, it wasn't the kind of net the shaman wanted. Even the shaman had given up. Why was that Yin Jiao still insisting? Although they thought that Xiao Xian's actions were a waste of effort, the drumming tribesmen who saw this scene were really touched. What a good person. The strange movements around its neck made the beast unhappy. It only had eyes for the fire in front of it and the people standing in front of it. Kill them all. Staring at the fire pit, the giant beast did not stop to pull the string around its neck. It continued to rush forward, but when it rushed forward, it swung its neck hard, trying to get rid of the person who was tying the string around its neck. The sudden force pulled Xiao Xian up. Because he was still holding onto the thread, it looked like he was flying a kite. Xiao Xian was the kite that was being flown up into the sky. The Yinjiao tribesmen were watching nervously. Their eyelids twitched uncontrollably. They didn't know what to do. Xiao Xian, who was being carried up into the sky, was calmer than they thought. There seemed to be a voice in his head telling him, "Yes, this will work." The totemic flames in his mind burned brightly. The fire seed's power in his blood flowed rapidly through his body. His blood was about to ignite. Whoosh! Xiao Xian's body was suddenly engulfed in flames. It was as if he was suddenly on fire. The totemic patterns under the flames were clear as day. A strong light turned into a glaring fire dragon. It followed the tightened thread from top to bottom, like lightning striking down from the sky, straight towards the beast's neck. Chapter 652. The giant beast, which was originally rushing towards the fire pit and roaring violently, suddenly felt a breath that made it tremble. Before the breath arrived, the scales on its neck seemed to be stimulated and stood up one by one. In the next moment, the scorching flames had already rushed down. When it was caught off guard, the entire neck of the beast was set ablaze. The net wrapped around the giant beast's neck was like a pair of flaming hands, strangling its entire neck. The resounding roar suddenly became intermittent and hoarse, as if it had been burned by sparks. With a strange roar that sounded like rough sand rubbing against each other, the giant beast spat out a mouthful of blood. The witch standing in the front was spurted by the blood. The Gu-Wu stood there covered in blood, his eyes glazed over. Something was wrong? In his own tribe, in his own territory, an outsider used an outsider's fire seed to burn their target. How was this possible? However, the scene in front of him completely overturned his knowledge. At this moment, the body below the giant beast's neck was wrapped in the yellowish flames of the Gu tribe, while the body above the neck was wrapped in the reddish flames. Two different colored flames had actually appeared on the same target. Although the two flames were clearly separated, they did not restrict each other because of the repulsion between the flames. Instead, they each had their own purpose, burning at their own target. This. How was this possible? As the net wrapped around the giant beast's neck started to burn, the rope net that was wrapped around the giant beast's body suddenly changed. The net was still the same, but with the biggest gap at the neck being filled up, it felt more complete. A complete net gave off a completely different aura. The various parts of the net seemed to have merged into one, forming a huge prison net, trapping the target. The giant beast's body stiffened, and even the simple act of lifting its claws became extremely difficult. In Xiao Xian's special vision, there were many invisible blue lines of fire all over the Gu tribe. That was the power of the Gu Wu, similar to the power of inheritance. Xiao Xian noticed this when he grabbed the rope that fell off. With a different vision he could see it clearly. The reason why the people of the drumming tribe could cooperate so well was because of the guidance of the invisible blue lines of fire. It was like a giant net that covered the entire area, trapping everything under it. And in the center of this net was the fire pit of the Gu tribe, where the blue lines of fire came from. One of the key factors that caused the rope to burn was the invisible blue lines of fire. Xiao Xian's body also had many invisible lines of fire. However, these lines of fire were not the red of totemic power, nor the blue of inheritance power, but white. These white lines of fire ignited the power of the fire seed in the blood that was smeared on the rope, producing flames similar to the primitive fire seed. Xiao Xian could feel the thread in his hand and the web around the beast's neck. Every part of the flame was like an extension of his meridians. Even the slightest flicker of the flame resonated with his pulse. Crack, crack, crack. With every movement of the giant beast, the sound of something hard cracking could be heard. The sound came from the giant beast's body. Under the tough scales, the wounds on the beast's body were expanding. Every time the beast breathed, it let out a deep roar like a heavy hammer pounding on its chest, giving off an inexplicable pressure. Not enough. The beast was trying to break free. Xiao Xian's eyes shone brightly as he increased the output of his power. The invisible white lines of fire around his body expanded again, and at the same time, the net around the beast's neck expanded again. Don't just stand there. Xiao Xian shouted, put in more power. The Gu shaman standing in front of the fire pit recovered from his shock. Looking at the flaming beast, he focused his mind and activated the power of the fire seed. He wanted to use the power of the fire seed to give the final blow, but with Xiao Xian's help he didn't need to risk his life, but it still took a lot of effort. The flames wrapped around the giant beast's body became fiercer and fiercer. The giant beast struggled and let out a painful howl. It wanted to tear off the ropes that trapped its body, but the movement of the beast's claws was like a rusty machine that was hindered more and more. The beast moved its two front claws to its neck, trying to tear the net off like before. But this time it was more difficult than before. Not only was its movement hindered, even when it touched the rope, it couldn't pull it off. After failing to pull, the giant beast suddenly looked up to the sky and let out an earth-shattering roar. Following this roar, the giant beast's two beastly paws suddenly smashed downwards. Even the front half of its body that was standing upright was forcefully thrown downwards. With this move, the giant beast began its final struggle. The moment the beast's paw smashed down, the entire ground began to shake. It was as if there were giant earth dragons moving underground. Under the cracks in the ground, chunks of earth flew up. The momentum was great and the earth and mountains shook. In such a large area, stones, wooden stakes dug deep into the ground to build houses, and trees rooted to the ground were all detached from the ground. No one could have imagined that under such circumstances, the giant beast that was trapped by the huge net and burned by the fire seed was still able to unleash such an aura. A strong wind rose from the center of the battlefield, blowing all the onlookers into the sky. Not only was the ground shaking violently, but their minds were also shaken. The moment the air wave hit, those who were slightly closer were momentarily dazed. Due to the beast's movements, Xiao Xian, who had been pulled down by the rope, was lifted up again before he hit the ground. The beast's body was expanding, and a thunderous sound came from its body. Hot air spurted out from under its scales, creating a sharp whistling sound. Pulling out the bones to support the tendons. It wanted to break the net. Charging for the final counterattack. Stubbornly holding on. Xiao Xian could hear the sound of blood flowing in his body. His blood flowed very fast, especially when the flames increased. The blood in his body was like a vast river, gushing non-stop. On the arm that was holding the thread, bulging green veins were pulsating like dragons. His bones emitted crackling sounds as if they were about to explode in the next moment. At this time it was a competition of who could last the longest. Finally, after a howl, the beast's head, which had just lifted, was smashed down again unwillingly. Its swollen body seemed to deflate, quickly shrinking and collapsing inwards. The beast's claws gradually slowed down. After an unknown period of time, all of the beast's movements stopped. Even its snorting nostrils disappeared. Chapter 653. The shockwave from the collision weakened. Xiao Xian, who had been thrown into the air, finally landed on the beast's back. To prevent the beast from biting him, Xiao Xian ran away as soon as he landed on the beast's back. Xiao Xian didn't dare to let go of the string in his hand. The flames were still burning. The beast's body was burnt black and the original markings were gone. Some of the scales stuck to the surface of the beast's body were exposed. Steam came out from under the scales and there was also the smell of meat. This should be enough, right? The Gu shaman was the first to stop. He had used up too much energy since the start of the mission. Even if he didn't lose his life, half of it was gone. He looked much older now and his black and white hair was all white. After the shaman stopped, Xiao Xian also stopped. The string around the beast's neck continued to burn even after Xiao Xian let go of it. When Xiao Xian retracted his power, the flames on the beast's neck were all extinguished. "Shaman, how are you?" The Gu tribesmen who could still move rushed over and surrounded the shaman. Those who were too injured to move also looked over worriedly. The Yanjiao tribesmen also rushed over to Xiao Xian. "Grand Elder, are you all right?" "I'm all right." Xiao Xian sat on the ground and panted. He pointed at the beast not far away. "Go take a look. If it's still breathing, give it a shot." Ah Guang pulled back the bow that was almost as tall as her and shot at a part of the beast's scales that was sticking out of its body. With a whoosh, the green arrowhead pierced through the giant beast's skin and flesh. The entire arrow sank into the giant beast's body. The beast didn't move. Wei threw the stone rope in his hand towards the beast's head. The rope wrapped around the spear and with a strong pull, the spear was pulled out of the beast's head. Actually, when the beast was trying its best to expand, the spears had already loosened. One spear had even fallen off, leaving only one spear on the beast's face. It was the spear that Xiao Xian threw at the beginning. Wei pulled the spear back and stabbed it again. When he pulled it out, there were shreds of flesh and blood on the spearhead. "It's not cooked yet," Duoli said reflexively. The surface of the giant beast's body was indeed scorched, especially the parts close to its scales. Some of them were even burnt like charcoal. A single spear strike could bring up a lot of black residue. But the parts closer to the core were still raw. The blood hadn't dried yet. "Let it bleed," Tuo said. No one objected. Many ferocious beasts had the phenomenon of feigning death. They had once seen a ferocious beast that was being pecked by carnivorous birds in the forest suddenly turn over. Those fearsome beasts only gave up a part of their body. After they escaped death, they would come out of the dead. The rotting parts of their bodies slowly peeled off and regenerated. This beast didn't look like one that could come back from the dead, but it was always better to be careful. Letting out blood was one of the ways to make a beast truly dead. They had used it before when they were hunting. However, this beast wasn't really the Yanjiao's prey. Generally speaking, this was the result of cooperation between the two parties. If they wanted to kill this beast, they had to ask for the other party's opinion. Hearing the Yanjiao's question, the Ji tribesmen agreed in a daze. They didn't have any experience with this. Do we need help?" Bogu, who was carried over, asked. He couldn't move, but the other Ji tribesmen could. "No need." Wei waved his hand and pulled out his broadsword. He approached the beast while Tuo and the others stayed on guard. The scales on the beast's neck were more exposed than the rest of its body. Almost all the parts where the net was exposed were exposed. The net made from worm silk broke into small pieces after the fire went out. With just a little pressure, the small pieces would turn into dust. It wasn't just Xiao Xian's worm silk. All the nets made by the Ji tribesmen turned into dust the moment the fire went out. Their mission was completed. Wei followed the burn marks on the beast's neck and made a cut. The scales were exposed, revealing the flesh underneath. It was much easier to cut. With one cut there was a deep cut. The flesh on both sides of the cut separated, revealing the dark red meat inside. No blood. Bogu was shocked. "Can't you see it's cooked?" "Of course there's no blood." Duo Li actually wanted to cut a piece of meat to taste, but he knew it wasn't the time, so he stood aside and continued waiting. "This is just the surface." Wei looked at Tuo and saw Tuo nodding. He knew that there was nothing wrong with the cut just now, so he was a little relieved. Once again he added another cut to the cut made by the previous cut. After 2 cuts, the cut was even deeper. They could even see the blood vessels. Still no blood. One more slash. Still no blood. Again. Bo Gu and the rest were observing the actions of the Yinjiao people. These people were indeed more familiar with fearsome beasts. Bo Gu thought about their attitude when the Yinjiao people came over and felt awkward. He wanted to apologize, but he didn't know how to. He wanted to thank them, but these Yinjiao people were more interested in the beast. They didn't have time to look at anything else. It couldn't be helped. As Yinjiao people who hunted for a living, fearsome beasts were more attractive to the Yinjiao people. Especially when they met a strong and unfamiliar fearsome beast, they paid more attention. Now that the beast was dead, they didn't have time to look at anything else. Wei was sweating profusely. He cut the beast's neck in half, but when he touched the vertebrae there was still no blood. Because the beast's entire neck was cooked. When the beast's entire neck was cooked, it would be strange if it was still breathing. It was almost the same as chopping off its head. Bo Gu was dumbfounded. The Flaming Horn tribesmen were responsible for the area around the giant beast's neck. They thought the net they set up was a useless one, but who would have thought that the net would be so deadly? It was even more terrifying than the net they set up. After all, the rest of the beast's body was only cooked on the surface. The insides were still the same. Only the beast's neck was completely cooked. Although the neck was thinner, it was only compared to the rest of the beast's body. In terms of depth of burn, the beast's neck was the most serious. He couldn't understand. He still couldn't understand. How was this possible? The shaman who was supported by the others also looked at the beast's neck in shock. The moment the giant beast fell, he had the urge to kneel down and shout in excitement. However, this kind of excitement was stuck when he saw the beast's neck. After staring for a while, the shaman said in disbelief, "It's really cooked." Such a beast, the beast that the Gu tribe's ancestors couldn't even kill when they passed away, the beast that almost destroyed their tribe, was cooked just like that? Until now, his heart still hadn't calmed down. The tension from before was still there. But looking at the beast's corpse, the shaman's heart was filled with complicated emotions. If it wasn't for the Yinjiao people's help, would they have failed this time? I still don't have enough experience. If I had more preparation during the trap, and more technique during the capture, the net would have been complete when the burn happened. The shaman thought to himself. If he could have done that, even if the Yinjiao people didn't help, they would have been able to stop the beast. But there was no ifs, there was no going back. A mistake was a mistake and a failure was a failure. Compared to the ancestors, 1,000 years of experience was fatal. Supported by others, the Gu shaman walked to Xiao Xian and bowed respectfully. "Thank you." The distance from before was gone, replaced by solemnity and seriousness. No matter why the Yinjiao people helped them, they would remember this favor. The Gu tribesmen with lighter injuries were treating the injured. After resting for a while, the shaman was also busy with the rescue. The place was a mess. There were holes and broken rocks everywhere. A little further away there were all kinds of rocks and broken pieces of wood. The Yinjiao people helped them clear a space for the injured and the dead. Looking at the Flaming Horn tribesmen throwing rocks that were almost as tall as them and using a thick tree as a broom to clean up the gravel, the drumming tribesmen's faces twitched. The Flaming Horn tribesmen's strength was indeed well deserved. Wei chopped some meat and gave it to the Gu tribesmen and the Yinjiao people to replenish their energy. Then he passed a piece of meat to Xiao Xian and sat down on the ground. He sighed, "We have to be careful in the future." As Xiao Xian ate the meat, the feeling of exhaustion eased a little. He asked, "Be careful of what?" "Be careful of the beast's revenge," Wei said. Some beasts were narrow-minded and liked to hold grudges. The one the Gu tribesmen encountered was a reminder to the Yinjiao people. That's why if you can finish it off in one go, don't leave it for the future. No one knows what will happen in the future. The law of the jungle had always been the law of the jungle. No one knew if the weaker side would be able to stand at the top of the food chain in the future. Xiao Xian was talking to Wei when he suddenly turned his head to look behind him. When Xiao Xian looked over, he didn't see anyone. All he saw was a pile of dirt. This was the center of the battlefield. Because of the giant beast's trampling, there were no large rocks here. There were bulges in the ground, but they couldn't hide people. But just now, someone did come close. Wei's eyes flashed with murderous intent. He raised the knife he just used to cut the meat and was about to rush over, but Xiao Xian stopped him. "Come out." Xiao Xian shouted in that direction. There was no movement. "Come out yourself or die underground," Xiao Xian said again. Yinjiao people didn't like being approached from behind. Many beasts that were good at hiding in the forest would use this method to attack people. "No, no, no. I'll come out." 6 words came out in a flash, almost as fast as a person saying 1 or 2 words. If it weren't for Xiao Xian's good hearing, he wouldn't have been able to hear what he said. After he finished speaking, Xiao Xian stared at the place where the ground cracked open. The soil was pushed away, and a human head slowly emerged from the ground. The person's face was full of beard, some of which were thick and stiff. It looked very strange. The beard was covered in dirt, so it was impossible to see what the person looked like. Chapter 654. Who are you? Wei asked with a dark expression. The other person's head shrunk back and he stuttered, I am from the Ye tribe. Ye tribe? Xiao Xian had heard the drumming tribesmen mention this before. Bo Gu said that the elderly and children of their tribe were all taken away by the Ye tribesmen. The only fire seed he could sense around here was the Ji tribe's fire seed. The Ye tribe should be quite a distance away. But if the Ji tribe could get the Ye tribe to take the elderly and children away, the two tribes must have a good relationship. Xiao Xian signaled Wei to put down his sword and said to the person not far away, You're here to look for the Ji tribe? Then why did you sneak up behind us? I'm here, to see the Yinjiao people. The other person stuttered and shrunk his neck. He squinted his eyes and looked at Xiao Xian and Wei. Xiao Xian was speechless. It sounded like he was looking at a chimpanzee in the zoo. At this moment, Bo Gu was carried over. Waji, why are you here? Bo Gu's wounds were already treated, but he didn't rest in the cleared area like the others. Instead, he asked someone to carry him here. He wanted to ask the Yinjiao people about hunting fearsome beasts, but he didn't expect to meet the Ye tribe's Waji. How are they? Bo Gu thought something happened to the people he brought out, so his tone was urgent. They're fine, they're fine. With Bo Gu's arrival, Waji's nervousness lessened. Although he still spoke quickly, at least he didn't stutter. I heard that there was no movement here, so I came over to take a look. Knowing that the people were fine, Bo Gu relaxed and introduced the person who suddenly appeared to Xiao Xian. He's Waji from the Ye tribe. The Ye tribe is quite far from our tribe, but they often move around our tribe. After a pause, Bo Gu hesitated for a moment before continuing. The Ye people live underground and have many underground tunnels. Sometimes we would ask them to deliver things to us. Previously, when we encountered the giant beast, the elders and children of the tribe were also taken away by them. Even so, he shouldn't have sneaked up on us from behind. I almost stabbed him, Wei said unhappily. Even if he was curious about us Yinjiao people, couldn't he have looked from afar? Do you have to sneak up on me? Cough, you've misunderstood, Bo Gu explained on behalf of Waji. The Ye tribesmen have poor judgment. Xiao Xian looked at Waji's squinted eyes and nodded in understanding. Previously, when he saw Waji's expression, he felt that it was strange. It did not look like he was smiling, but it turned out that he had bad eyesight. Xiao Xian from Yinjiao. Xiao Xian introduced himself, then looked at Waji. Hello, excavator. Waji, my name is Waji, Waji corrected. Waji, have the Ye tribesmen ever thought of going to the Flaming River Trading Point? Xiao Xian asked. Flaming River Trading Point? I've heard of it. I was the one who told Bo Gu and the others about it. Waji's long fingernails dug into the ground anxiously. I wanted to go before, but I didn't dare. Why didn't you dare? You know how to dig holes, isn't it safer to go underground? Xiao Xian was puzzled. Waji's squinted eyes quickly looked up at Xiao Xian, then shrunk back. I heard that you Yinjiao people are huge, have sharp teeth and claws, and eat people. Waji spoke quickly and bluntly. The words came out of his mouth so fast that Bo Gu could not stop him in time. Xiao Xian and Wei were speechless. What the hell? It was fine if he had sharp teeth and claws, but the Yinjiao people would not take the blame for eating people. Bullshit. Who said we eat people? Wei glared angrily. Waji continued to dig into the ground. I heard. I didn't say it. Ahem, that, Bo Gu had to explain again. The Ye people heard a lot of news, both real and fake. The people of the Ye tribe dug holes everywhere, and they liked to communicate with each other. When they dug holes in one tribe, they would chat for a while, and when they dug holes in another tribe, they would chat for a while. Then, when their own people gathered together, they would brag and brag. The truth and lies were stacked on top of each other, and when combined with imagination, the truth was distorted a lot. Waji also realized that it was not good to talk about this in front of the Yinjiao people. He scratched his messy hair uncomfortably with his long fingernails, then reached into his clothes and dug around. He jumped out of the ground. His short body was exposed and his neck was short. Xiao Xian thought that he was timid and shrunk his neck, but now he realized that Waji's neck was short to begin with. When he shrunk his neck, it looked like his head was connected to his shoulders. After jumping out of the ground, Waji offered the food in his hand to Xiao Xian. Want to eat? Sharing food was one of the ways to show friendliness. It was common among many tribes. This was also Waji's way of showing his friendliness to Xiao Xian and Wei. If he could be on good terms with the Yanjiao people, he could go back and brag to his brothers. But Xiao Xian looked at the dried worms made from annelids that Waji took out. No, thank you. You can eat it yourself. Waji asked Xiao Xian about the Flaming River trading point, then went to take a closer look at the giant beast. Because of his poor eyesight or even high myopia, his nose almost touched the beast. After chatting and looking, Waji left. He felt uncomfortable under the sun for a long time. Yangguang did not give him a sense of security. On the contrary, if he was exposed to the Yangguang for too long, he would feel uncomfortable all over. The Yi people preferred the dark underground. That way they felt safer. I'll go underground first. I'll bring your tribesmen back, Waji said to Bo Gu, then went underground again. The soil on the surface was quickly tossed up by his two large hands. Soon Waji's figure disappeared. There must be other holes that they dug nearby. However, the hole under our feet must have collapsed. After Waji left, Bo Gu said to Xiao Xian, the Yi people are just a little too curious and timid. They're actually not bad people. To put it bluntly, the Yi people were just a little gossipy and timid. They didn't have much ambition or intelligence to scheme. After settling the injured, the shaman came to Xiao Xian. You lost quite a lot this time. Not a single house was left, Xiao Xian said. No worries. We can just rebuild. This was already the best result at this stage. At least there were still many of them who were still alive. The shaman carefully held a wooden box and passed it to Xiao Xian. This time, thank you all from Yanjiao. The wooden box was opened. It was filled with crystal balls of all sizes. These were the ones the shaman showed Xiao Xian and the others when they first arrived. They looked like cat's eye stones. But compared to the one the shaman showed them, these were much brighter. On the crystal balls, the eye lines were narrower and clearer. When they turned, they looked like eyes opening and closing. However, these weren't the ones the shaman cared about the most. The shaman removed the top layer of the wooden box, revealing the contents of the bottom layer. The bottom layer of the wooden box was cushioned with soft fur. There were even wooden compartments. Every compartment contained a quail egg-sized bead. There were a total of 9 compartments, 9 beads. At first glance, these 9 beads looked similar to the ones on the top layer. They were just brighter. But when you looked at them again, you realized that wasn't the case. Look again, the shaman said. Xiao Xian stared at the beads. His eyes widened in shock. This is. On the 9 pearls, a clear eye line appeared. However, unlike the bright light on the pearls on the upper layer, on the 9 pearls on the lower layer, a thin line with a darker color first appeared. Then, the thin line opened up, and a slightly lighter filament-like line stretched outwards along the thin line. And as these filament-like lines stretched outwards, the originally dark thin line was like the pupil of a beast, narrowing and widening from its narrowness. It wasn't the usual optical effect produced by the stone under the light, but it was like the eyes of a ferocious beast. When the beast-like eye lines on the crystal opened, Xiao Xian felt a chill as if he was facing a ferocious beast. It was too similar. Those who didn't know would think it was a beast's eye. It wasn't just Xiao Xian. Wei and the others who saw this couldn't help but scratch their arms. A layer of goosebumps appeared on their skin. Luckily, many of them had eaten a beast's eye before. They quickly calmed down from their shock. However, their emotions were stirred up by the shaman's next words. This is actually called ground eye. No matter if it's the top layer or the bottom layer, they can all be considered ground eye stones. But these 9 beads on the bottom layer are not normal ground eye stones. They are the universal eyes of the ground eye stones. Universal eyes? Xiao Xian didn't understand the meaning of this name. The shaman wasn't in a hurry to explain. Instead, he moved the wooden box left and right. Then he used his other hand to cover the top of the wooden box. Can you see it? The shaman asked. They're facing the sun. Xiao Xian was shocked. It wasn't obvious when the shaman moved the box, but when he covered the top of the crystal with his hand, the eyes of the beads on the top layer were not obvious due to the light being blocked. However, the 9 beads on the bottom layer were still facing the direction of the sun and opened their eyes. That's right. No matter where the universal eyes are, no matter which direction you stand, no matter how you move the beads, they will always face the sun. Even if they're covered, as long as it's not in absolute darkness, they will always have their eyes open. Not only during the day, they will also have their eyes open at night. But at that time they won't be facing the sun but the moon. It said that only 1 out of 10,000 ground eye stones is a universal eye. If it was just a beautiful crystal, Xiao Xian wouldn't be too surprised. However, this kind of crystal with a precise direction was very useful. The tribesmen had their own ways of identifying directions. Some relied on crystals to see the position of the sun behind the clouds, some relied on divination, some relied on beast-like intuition, and some directly relied on domesticated animals such as birds and insects. However, these universal eyes that the shaman took out were the most accurate, least restrictive and most convenient crystals Xiao Xian had ever seen. They were comparable to a compass. Chapter 655. These were the real treasures of the Gu shaman. When Xiao Xian and the others first arrived, the Gu shaman only took out some normal goods to trick the Yanjiao people. The Gu shaman probably realized this too, so his expression became a little awkward. Xiao Xian didn't mind. I've never seen this kind of stone before. Xiao Xian picked up a universal eye and felt its ability to see the sun. These were given to me by the Jing tribe. I only get one every year. I've been the shaman for 9 years, but I only got these 9 in total, the Gu shaman explained. As for the previous shamans, he could count them with one hand. Their relationship with the Jing tribe only improved after he took over. It was rare for them to get one every year. The previous Gu shamans didn't have such good treatment. Jing tribe? Is it the tribe you mentioned that is still downstream of you? Are these ground eye stones produced by their tribe? Xiao Xian asked. That's right. Plus, the Jing tribe rarely uses this kind of stone for trade. Normal ground eye stones might be used occasionally, but the universal eye stone would never be used for trade. However, ordinary ground eye stones had no other uses other than to be used as decorations. To many tribes who were struggling to survive, they were useless. Just like the crystals that the drumming tribe had kept, they couldn't be exchanged for much even if they were used to trade. Seeing that Xiao Xian was interested in these universal eyes, the Gu shaman also wanted to change the Yanjiao people's impression of them. After all, because of the giant beast incident, they were too confident and guarded against the Yanjiao people. Their words were obviously trying to chase them away. Now that they were indebted to the Yanjiao people and saw that the Yanjiao people didn't try to rob them, the Gu shaman wanted to improve their relationship. I don't know how the universal eye is produced. I only know that it's only produced in the Jing tribe. I've never heard of it appearing in other tribes. We have a good relationship with the Jing tribe, and we have helped them many times in the past. The Jing tribe's fishing nets and hunting nets were also exchanged from us. That's why they gave us the ground eye stones and universal eyes, the Gu shaman said. Then I'll accept it. Xiao Xian studied the universal eyes for a while and then passed them to Duo Li and the others. They were also very curious about these universal eyes. When they hunted in the forest, it wasn't sunny every day. Sometimes the clouds were too thick and there were natural disturbances in the forest, making it difficult for them to determine the correct location and time. At those times, even if they used a sunstone to look at the sky, they might not be able to see the sun behind the clouds. However, if they had the universal eyes, they wouldn't have to worry. They would be able to accurately judge the weather conditions of the storm. They didn't expect to find such good stuff. No wonder the Gu shaman hid all these things. It looks like a real eye's eye, Duo Li exclaimed. Indeed, head elder. We can put 2 of them on the beast skulls in the Flaming River Castle. Some of the decorations in the Flaming River Castle were made from the bones of fearsome beasts, but they were just bones. They didn't have eyes, only empty eye sockets. If they put the universal eyes on them and put a layer of skin over the bones, they would look real. But these are too small. It would be nice if we had a bigger one. While the Yanjiao people were discussing, the Gu shaman thought of something and continued to talk to Xiao Xian. Actually, the Jing tribe has another type of crystal. It's rarer than the universal eyes, but other than the Jing tribe, no one else has seen it before. Even though I'm close to the Jing shaman, I've never seen it before. When I saw the Jing shaman, he already had an extra eye here. That's more like a real eye than the universal eyes. No, I should say that it's already an eye. Xiao Xian's heart skipped a beat. He immediately became serious and sat up straight. An eye? That kind of stone? You can put an eye on it? Yes. I don't know why the Jing tribe calls it the ground eye stone, but I know that every shaman in the Jing tribe will have a special eye. They put it in when they take over the position of shaman. The Gu shaman pointed between his eyebrows. That's why the Jing shaman has an extra eye compared to other people. It's said that because of that eye, the Jing shaman can see things that normal people can't. Seeing that Xiao Xian was very interested in the eye, the Gu shaman told him what he knew. Of course, he wasn't an old acquaintance of the Jing tribe. He just felt that the Yinjiao people wouldn't rob them. Plus, the Yinjiao people were rich. They had a lot of food and sturdy tools. If they could be on good terms with the Yinjiao people, the Jing tribe would benefit too. They might even be able to exchange these ground ice stones with the Yinjiao people for food and tools. The Jing people aren't that different from normal people. Only their shaman is different. Of course, before the Jing shaman took over the position of shaman, he only had 2 eyes. To take over the position of the Jing shaman, he must successfully fuse with 1 eye. Only a successful person can take over the position. That's why every generation of shaman has 3 eyes. If no one in that generation can successfully fuse with an eye, they would rather leave the position of shaman empty. They would never allow a 2-eyed shaman to appear. All in all, in the Jing tribe, normal people couldn't become shamans. Only those with 3 eyes could. What are the conditions for fusing with the eye you mentioned? Can non-Jing people use it? Other than humans, can it be used on fearsome beasts? Xiao Xian asked a few questions in a row. I'm not sure. The Gu shaman said honestly, although I have a good relationship with the Jing shaman, we rarely talk about his 3rd eye. That's a secret of the Jing tribe. Alright. The Gu shaman remembered what was written in his ancestor's notes. According to my ancestor, non-Jing people can't use that eye. People from different tribes had different bloodlines and beliefs, so the totem power in their bodies was different in nature, not to mention the fire seed. The fire seeds of different tribes rejected each other and could not coexist, so it must be the same for people from different tribes. I see. Xiao Xian was a little disappointed. There were also people in the tribe who lost their eyes in hunting or war. If they could have a chance to see again, even if they only had 1 eye, it would be a new life for them. Why don't we want to? The Gu shaman sighed. In his ancestors' notes, it said that in the early years, there were people who wanted to find eyes for their family members or close friends who lost their eyes, but they were all rejected by the Jing tribe. The reason they gave was that non-Jing people couldn't use those eyes. Xiao Xian thought for a while and asked, if people can't use it, what about fearsome beasts? Fearsome beasts? The Gu shaman didn't expect Xiao Xian to continue asking. He knew a little about humans, but as for fearsome beasts, in the past 1,000 years, the people of the Gu tribe had very limited contact with fearsome beasts, not to mention the Jing tribe's eyes. This I really don't know. The ancestors' notes didn't mention it. The Gu shaman shook his head. Since he couldn't get an answer from the Gu shaman, Xiao Xian decided to ask the Jing tribe himself. Elder Xiao Xian, you want to change a fearsome beast's eye? The Gu shaman was very curious about this. Yes, I have a fearsome beast. It's a wolf. It lost an eye during a war with another tribe. Since people can't do it, I want to know if fearsome beasts can use it. I'm not sure if the Jing tribe has an extra eye, Xiao Xian said. He had heard that Yinjiao had tamed fearsome beasts, but now that he heard it from Xiao Xian himself, the Gu shaman couldn't help but feel envious. However, after this battle, the people of the drumming tribe also gained experience. There were more ferocious beasts on the other side of the river. They would try to hunt or tame them step by step. They would get back the experience they had lost 1,000 years ago and experience the life their ancestors lived 1,000 years ago. The Gu shaman thought about the Yinjiao people's strong physiques. Maybe the Yinjiao people were so strong because they ate fearsome beasts? Alright, I have a question for Elder Xiao Xian. The Gu shaman hesitated for a while before asking. Go ahead. Why were you able to ignite the rope net back then? If it was that easy to ignite the rope net, many people would have done it a long time ago. It was because it was difficult and there were too many restrictions that made the Gu tribe even more special. Plus, even if he knew how to ignite it, he was in the Gu tribe's territory. He was very close to the Gu tribe's fire pond, but there was no sign of the flames suppressing each other. The Gu shaman still couldn't understand. Even if Xiao Xian was an elder of the Yinjiao tribe, he wasn't a shaman. How could he do this? Actually, I don't know the answer to this question myself. Xiao Xian thought back to the situation back then. It was very mysterious. It was as if there was a voice telling him that he would succeed if he did it. Now that he thought about it, he was too impulsive back then. But at that time he suddenly had the desire to find out more. Maybe this was why his not divination told him to come back. Xiao Xian also planned to find some time to study it in detail. Maybe it's the protection of our ancestors, Xiao Xian said. The Gu shaman was speechless. Are you fucking kidding me? Why would Yinjiao's ancestors come out of the Gu tribe's territory, right next to the Gu tribe's fire seed? Seeing the Gu shaman's confused face, Xiao Xian laughed. Do you know why I can be Yinjiao's grand elder? The Gu shaman shook his head. Because our ancestors chose me. The Gu shaman stared at Xiao Xian for a while. He realized that Xiao Xian didn't seem to be talking nonsense. He was even more puzzled. Leaving the Gu shaman to continue thinking, Xiao Xian got up to let the people who were free deal with the giant beast. His biggest secret was something that he would never tell anyone else. Xiao Xian and the Gu shaman discussed the distribution of the spoils of war. The Yanjiao tribe took half of the giant beast's scales and meat. If they could help at a critical moment, Xiao Xian would also take half of the meat and scales. The Gu tribe didn't have any objections. In terms of contribution, the Gu tribe had the most, but if it weren't for the Yanjiao people, they didn't know what would have happened to them. This distribution was reasonable. The people of the Flaming Horn tribe only took the scales and meat. The scales were used to make armor. The giant beast's scales were indeed a good material. Even if the edges of the scales were curled up, they could still be hammered flat when the armor was made. As for the meat, they still needed to eat on the ship. This level of fearsome beast meat was enough to keep them hungry. The claws and bones were also left for the Gu tribe. It wasn't easy for them to carry more on the ship. Knowing that Xiao Xian was going to look for the Jing tribe, the Gu shaman even wrote a cloth scroll for Xiao Xian to bring along. He told Xiao Xian to give it to the Jing shaman directly. This way the Jing tribe wouldn't be too guarded and wouldn't reveal anything. Chapter 656. Originally, the shaman wanted to send a few people who were familiar with the Jing tribe to lead the way for Xiao Xian and the others, but the drumming tribe had just met with a disaster. Most of their houses had collapsed and needed to be rebuilt. It was a huge project, and they needed to take care of the dead and injured as well as their families, so he could only write a letter to Xiao Xian. After Xiao Xian and the others left the drumming tribe, the shaman thought for a while and asked the Ye tribe to send a letter to the Jing tribe. The Ye tribe wouldn't encounter any fearsome beasts when they traveled underground. It was faster and more convenient, so they might be able to reach the Jing tribe before the Yanjiao people. With the Ye tribe in the middle, the Jing tribe's attitude towards the Yanjiao would be better. However, the shaman didn't know that Xiao Xian and the others were even faster than the Ye tribe. The people of the Ye tribe didn't need to cross the mountains to get to the Jing tribe, but not every place was suitable for digging tunnels, especially near the river. Sometimes they had to take a long detour and rest after walking for a while. Xiao Xian and the others didn't stop to rest other than putting up signs on the shore. They continued to travel day and night. Ever since the giant beast was killed, the river near the drumming tribe became much calmer. Smaller fish started to swim around, and they didn't see any other large and aggressive river beasts. The big fish that Bo Luo encountered before might have been driven away by the giant beast. As they continued to travel down the flaming river, the changes in the terrain weren't too obvious. It was similar to where the drumming tribe was, but compared to the drumming tribe upstream, the forest here was much denser. Xiao Xian sat cross-legged in the cabin with his sword on his lap. There was a trace of blood on the sword. Xiao Xian had used his own blood to smear it on his sword. He thought back to how he ignited the net in the drumming tribe and wanted to see if he could use the same method on his sword. Unfortunately, he never succeeded. He felt like he was missing something, but he couldn't figure out what it was. "There's someone," someone shouted outside. Xiao Xian also noticed the Jing tribe's fire seed, so he put down his sword and walked out of the cabin. "We're here." The Jing tribe also lived by the flaming river. They weren't too close to the river bank, but they weren't too far away either. They were even closer to the river bank than the drumming tribe. The Gu shaman once told Xiao Xian that the Jing people migrated here later on. No one knew where they were before, but after the disaster 1,000 years ago, the Jing tribe moved here. There were people in the forest looking at them. There were also some sharp bird cries. Xiao Xian and the others knew that those weren't bird cries, but signals from people hiding in the forest. As the two ships slowly approached the shore, the people in the forest retreated away from the riverbank, but they still hid in the forest and stared vigilantly at the two ships approaching the shore. They had never seen a boat before, so they were more wary of foreign tribesmen. When the ships approached the shore, they could clearly see a man-made piece of land. There weren't any tall trees there. Other than some short wooden stakes, there was only grass. Even the weeds weren't as tall as the ones in the forest. Those short wooden stakes were probably used to tie down wooden rafts. There were signs of ropes being tied around them. The dents in the grass were obviously stepped on by people. That was why the grass was crooked from standing upright. If people stepped on them often, the grass wouldn't be tall. When they reached the shore, Xiao Xian looked up at the forest in front of him. From the riverbank to the forest there was a small path. It was only 2 to 3 meters wide, but in the dense forest, this small path was very obvious. The Gu shaman once said that the Jing people would use the drumming tribe's nets to catch fish in the river. They probably used this path to travel between the tribe and the river. Xiao Xian brought his people forward. They didn't go deep into the forest, so they stood still. Are you from the Jing tribe? We're from the Yinjiao tribe. We have something to discuss with you. Please tell the Jing shaman. There were definitely other traps in the forest. Although Xiao Xian wasn't afraid of them, it was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. Plus, he still needed to find eyes from the Jing tribe, so he had to leave a good first impression. After Xiao Xian shouted, the forest was quiet for a while. Then there were a few bird calls, and some rustling sounds not far away. Someone must have left to report. Xiao Xian wasn't in a hurry. He found a rock in the forest and sat down to wait. The others looked around to see if there were any differences between the plants here and upstream of the flaming river. After about 20 minutes, footsteps could be heard from afar. There were also people talking in low voices. There were quite a few people here, no less than 200. It was about the same number of people as Xiao Xian's ship. The crowd got closer and closer. The path was too narrow, so some people walked directly into the forest. The cracking sounds of branches being stepped on became clearer and clearer. Soon, some figures appeared in the forest. Yang Guang's light shone on the forest. Because of the tree branches above, only a part of the light shone on the path. There were even fewer Yang Guang's light in the forest on both sides of the path, so at a glance, the people who could see most clearly were the people walking on the path. There were 3 strong warriors in front. Maybe it was because they were always exposed to the sun, but they looked darker. The drumming tribe's people were already tan, but the Jing tribe's people were even darker than the drumming tribe's people. However, the paintings on their bodies were painted with bright colors. White, red, blue, yellow, green, and so on. The 3 Jing warriors in front held horns, bones, or stone weapons in one hand. In the other hand, they held round shields in front of their chests, covering their entire torso. Only their legs and noses were exposed. Their clear eyes showed unconcealable nervousness. They could probably tell that the Yinjiao people weren't easy to deal with. It would be strange if they didn't take precautions when facing powerful foreign tribesmen. Their shields were made of wood or rattan. After all, they weren't as strong as the Yinjiao people. Shields made from stone or bone weapons were indeed sturdier, but they were too heavy. For people who didn't have the advantage of strength, a heavy shield wouldn't be able to unleash its full potential. Instead, it would become a burden in battle. Looking at the Jing people's equipment, Xiao Xian had a rough idea of their strength. He looked past the 3 warriors and looked at the person behind them. There was a skinny middle-aged man there. His gaze was like a knife. When he looked at Xiao Xian, his gaze was like a sharp blade shooting out from his eyes. It made people shiver. Other than that, the middle-aged man also had the dignified aura of a leader. It was obvious that he was different from the others. The Jing shaman? Xiao Xian remembered what the Gu shaman said. He looked at the middle of the man's eyebrows. There wasn't the third eye the Gu shaman mentioned, but there was a vertical line between the man's eyebrows. It had to be him. Xiao Xian thought to himself. The 3 people in front protected the middle-aged man closely. When they were about 20 meters away from Xiao Xian, they stopped moving forward. It wasn't just them. The other Jing people who came with them were also nervous. They were on guard and uneasy. The middle-aged man raised his hand and gently pushed the 3 warriors in front of him. The 3 warriors hesitated for a moment before they moved aside. However, their gazes were still fixed on Xiao Xian and the others. If Xiao Xian and the others made any strange movements, they would immediately pull the middle-aged man back. The weather was already very hot at this time of the year. The lower reaches of the flaming river seemed to be even hotter than the upper reaches. Because of this, the tribesmen Xiao Xian and the others met on the boat didn't wear much. Most of their skin was exposed under the Yang Guang's eyes. The Ji tribesmen wore linen and ropes as decorations. On the other hand, the Jing tribesmen didn't have such complicated clothing. Most of the warriors who came over were bare-chested. Only their waists and feet were covered. As the distance between the 2 parties got closer, they could see the brightly colored drawings on their bodies more clearly. It wouldn't have mattered if the drawings were other things, but the Jing tribesmen all had eyes on their bodies. The Hui tribesmen liked cloud tattoos, the Ji tribesmen liked net tattoos, and the Jing tribesmen liked eye tattoos. Their tribe's totem looked like 3 vertical eyes. Most of the tattoos on the Jing totem warriors' bodies were eye tattoos, but their drawing skills weren't bad. The different shades of the tattoos were layered, as if there were countless eyes growing on their bodies. The bright colors contrasted against their tan skin, making the existence of these eyes even more obvious. People with trypophobia would feel disgusted and nervous when they saw the Jing tribesmen. They wouldn't be able to look straight at them. They didn't wear much, but they had many accessories on their bodies. There were necklaces on their ears, necks, wrists, waists, and feet. They were all made from ground eye stones. Together with the eyes on their bodies, it made people feel like they were being stared at by countless eyes. It was scary. "Are you Yinjiao tribesmen?" the middle-aged man who walked out asked. "That's right." Xiao Xian could tell that the Jing tribesmen had heard of the Yinjiao tribe before, but he didn't know which version they had heard. Looking at how nervous they were and thinking about their relationship with the Ji tribe, the version that the Jing tribesmen knew was definitely not the real one. Perhaps the short-sighted Yi tribesmen were gossiping too much. "What do you want?" the man asked again. "We just came from the Ji tribe. We have some questions." Xiao Xian took out the cloth scroll that the Gu shaman gave him and threw it over. The man caught the cloth scroll and looked at Xiao Xian suspiciously. His gaze lingered on the cloth scroll for 2 seconds before he opened it. He was probably checking if there was anything bad on the cloth scroll, such as poison or other traps. However, after seeing what was written on the cloth scroll, the man's tense expression relaxed. Zhen wrote this. The Gu shaman's name was Zhen, so after the Jing shaman said this name, Xiao Xian nodded. The Gu shaman had already written the general situation on the cloth scroll. After the man read it, he raised his hand to tell the people behind him not to be too nervous. He turned around and said to Xiao Xian, "Please?" This meant that he agreed to let Xiao Xian enter the Jing tribe for a detailed discussion. Xiao Xian only brought half of his people with him, leaving the other half to guard the boat. Chapter 657. The Jing tribe wasn't big. They had less than 1,000 people, not even half the size of the drumming tribe. They weren't a battle-type tribe either. However, no matter how small a tribe was, they couldn't be underestimated. After Xiao Xian entered the Jing tribe, he only saw wild fruits and vegetables, fish, and some small animals. A non-battle-type tribe had limited attack power, so the prey they could hunt was also limited. The prey in the back should have been caught with the drumming tribe's nets. However, this tribe with less than 1,000 people had a bigger territory than the drumming tribe. Of course, in this remote place where there were few people and no one owned the land, the boundaries were all drawn by themselves. In theory, they could claim as much land as they wanted. However, there were many factors involved. If the territory was too big, the guards wouldn't be able to keep up, and there would be too many gaps. If they overestimated themselves and claimed the territory, they would be digging their own grave. Therefore, the territory of each tribe was determined according to their own tribe's ability. The Jing tribe obviously wasn't stupid. How could a tribe that could survive until now be stupid? How could they not understand this? But they still claimed such a big territory. After going deeper into the Jing tribe, Xiao Xian found the answer to this question. More than half of the Jing tribe's territory was quagmires. If one looked down from the sky, all the quagmires in the Jing tribe looked like an eye, corresponding to the eye pattern on the Jing tribe's totem. The quagmires formed a barrier that prevented dangerous creatures from approaching the tribe. Within the Jing tribe, there was a large, circular quagmires in the middle of the tribe. The Jing tribe's houses were also built like a fence, but they weren't as tall and complicated as the drumming tribe's houses. Most of the Jing tribe's houses were built on the ground. Only the shaman's house was built above the quagmires in the middle. From the shape of the quagmires, the Jing tribe probably made the quagmires themselves. Otherwise, why would they be in the shape of an eye? The Jing shaman brought them into the tribe. Because there weren't enough houses for all the Yinjiao tribesmen, the Jing shaman welcomed them outside the house. However, the Jing shaman still brought Xiao Xian to the house in the middle of the quagmires to discuss matters. Before this, the Jing shaman asked Xiao Xian if they should discuss in another house or go to the quagmires in the middle of the tribe. Xiao Xian chose the latter. This choice made the Jing people sigh in relief. Although they didn't reject the Yinjiao people as much because of the drumming tribe, they were still on guard against them. The central quagmire was close to the fire pit of the tribe. According to the traditional thinking of the tribesmen, the closer to the fire pit, the safer it would be. Xiao Xian's choice surprised the Jing shaman. However, he was only surprised for a moment and did not ask for the reason. He asked the others to wait outside the quagmire while the Xiao Xian walked along a wooden bridge built over the quagmire. He followed the shaman to the Jing tribe's largest and most special house built over the quagmire. The Jing tribe was the same as the drumming tribe. Shamans had a high status in the tribe. In the Jing tribe, the position of chief was dispensable. In the history of the Jing tribe, there were many times when there was no chief. The shaman held many positions and had absolute power. Basically, no one in the tribe dared to refute his words. The shaman was the only one who had the final say. The Jing shaman opened the door to the wooden house. When he brought Xiaoxian in, he quickly glanced at Xiaoxian's face. He noticed that Xiaoxian didn't show any expression because he was close to the fire pit. This made the Jing shaman even more surprised. Xiaoxian observed the wooden house built over the quagmire. In the Jing tribe, this was considered a luxurious house. Not only was it big, but it was also built with great care. A lot of thought was put into the materials and design. Although it was mostly made of wood, it looked very sturdy and didn't look shabby. After entering the house, Xiaoxian saw some decorations made of ground eye stones placed in obvious places. One of them was made of high-quality ground eye stones piled up to form a pagoda. At the top, there was a green universal eye. This universal eye was twice as big as the 9 universal eyes the shaman gave Xiaoxian. The colorless parts were almost transparent, and the green parts were crystal clear. It looked like a real beast's eye, but it didn't make people feel cold. Instead, they had the desire to keep staring at it. No wonder this was where the shaman lived. Even the stones were bigger and better looking than other people's. Seeing that Xiaoxian stared at the universal eye with only surprise and curiosity, there was no greed in his eyes. The Jing shaman's expression softened, and he revealed a rare friendly smile. He didn't even realize that he was showing off. He explained to Xiaoxian, "That was passed down by my ancestors. It's more than 800 years old now. It's old." Xiaoxian didn't understand why the shaman would use this word. Wasn't this just a stone? Understanding what Xiaoxian was thinking, the Jing shaman continued, "Of course it will grow old and die. Ground eye stones have a lifespan. The universal eye can live for hundreds or even thousands of years, but normal ground eye stones can't. They can only live for about 100 years, and many will close their eyes forever after a few decades." This statement made people's hair stand on end, but Xiaoxian understood what it meant. "Where do they come from?" Xiaoxian asked again. Ground eye stones were naturally formed and not man-made. Where did they come from? Where do they come from? The Jing shaman slowly stroked his beard. They come from the ground eyes. They are taken out from the bodies of ground eyes. What are ground eyes? They are a type of beast that lives underground. This kind of stone was taken out from the bodies of animals. After the Jing shaman's explanation, Xiaoxian thought of the reason. Just like how pearls had a shelf life, the ground eye stones, that were produced from the bodies of animals also had a shelf life. The better the quality of the ground eye stone, the longer the shelf life. In other words, these ground eye stones would die after their shelf life, and would never open their eyes again. After explaining the origin of the ground eye stones, the Jing shaman kept his mouth shut about the universal eye and the eye, unwilling to talk more about it. "You said you have something to discuss. What is it?" the Jing shaman asked. Although the Gu shaman's cloth scroll mentioned something, it only said that Yanjiao was interested in the ground eye stones, and advised them to use the ground eye stones to exchange for more things with Yanjiao. Other than that, there was nothing else. "You must already know that we are very interested in the ground eye stones, including the normal ground eye stones, the 1 in 10,000 universal eyes, and the eye." At the end of his sentence, Xiaoxian raised his finger and pointed between his eyebrows, but his eyes were looking at the Jing shaman. His meaning couldn't be clearer. Hearing this, the Jing shaman's friendly face immediately darkened, and a fierce look flashed across his eyes. "Your goal is this?" Xiaoxian was still calm and said calmly, "We have a lot of beautiful stones, and we also have other tools and methods to point out the direction. I came here this time for this stone. I don't know what you call it, but I just want to exchange it with you." "Impossible." The Jing shaman stood up and stared straight at Xiaoxian. "I know Yanjiao is strong, but it's useless to you even if you want it. Without the Jing bloodline you can't merge with it. It has nothing to do with strength. The ground eye stones might be related to the Jing fire seed. People with different bloodlines and different fire seed abilities might have a strong rejection towards it, and it would be impossible to merge with it." "I know that," Xiaoxian said. "What I want to know is, can this thing be used on fearsome beasts?" The Jing shaman didn't wait for Xiaoxian to finish speaking and already wanted to reject him, but after hearing Xiaoxian's words he immediately froze. He looked at Xiaoxian as if he was looking at a crazy person. The Jing shaman's gaze was too direct, but the Xiaoxian didn't have any other thoughts. He still stared at the Jing shaman, waiting for his answer. "You want to use it on fearsome beasts?" "Yes. A fearsome beast that lost an eye." The Jing shaman took a deep breath and exhaled heavily. His eyebrows were squeezed together, and there were many wrinkles on both sides of the line between his eyebrows. After a while, the Jing shaman finally spoke. I've never tried it before. Maybe the ancestors of the Jing tribe had tried it before, but there were no relevant records left behind. Plus, the Jing tribe migrated here 1,000 years ago. Their tribe moved along with the river, so they had to choose a place near the river that wouldn't dry up during the dry season. 1,000 years ago, the ancestors of the Jing tribe chose this river that formed after the disaster. This river became the Flaming River after the second disaster. Compared to other tribes, the Jing tribe's migration frequency was relatively high. Because of this, many ancient records were lost during the migration. Most of the records that the Jing tribe had were left behind after they migrated here. But after they came here, other than the fearsome beasts that lived at the edge of the forest for the first 2 years, the Jing people had never come into contact with fearsome beasts until now. That was why the Jing shaman couldn't answer Xiao Xian's question. Then do you have any extra eyes? Xiao Xian asked. The Jing shaman was just about to reject him, but he suddenly thought of something and stopped himself. He fell silent. Xiao Xian raised his eyebrows when he saw the shaman's reaction. Xiao Xian originally thought that the shaman would strongly reject him, so he prepared a countermeasure. Yinjiao had a lot of things to offer, so he might be able to force the shaman to open his mouth. But now, it seemed like this shaman's attitude wasn't right. There was a chance. Xiao Xian didn't rush him and waited for him to consider. About 2 minutes later, the Jing shaman probed. I heard that the Yinjiao tribe is very powerful and has many things that others don't have. Is that true? What do you mean? Xiao Xian asked. Weapons, food, or something else? Can the Yinjiao tribe heal injuries? The Jing shaman looked at Xiao Xian with a gaze that wasn't harsh. Instead, it was filled with anticipation. Xiao Xian's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't show it on his face. He continued to ask, that depends on what kind of injury it is. It's a serious injury. He can't walk. The Jing shaman's face was dark as if he thought of something bad. You need to see him to know. Without seeing his condition, I can't give you an answer, Xiao Xian said. Sure. If you can heal him, I'll give you an eye. Chapter 658. For the shaman to care so much, this person must have a special relationship with him. The shaman's house on the central quagmire was very big. Although it was only 1 floor, there were no less than 20 rooms of different sizes. Xiao Xian followed the shaman to a room in the corner. It was a big room. When Xiao Xian went over, a woman walked out with a sad face. When she saw the shaman bring Xiao Xian over, she was surprised for a moment. Then, she thought of something and her eyes lit up with excitement. She wanted to ask the shaman something, but the shaman raised his hand to stop her. The door opened and Xiao Xian looked inside. There was only 1 bed in the room. It was made of wood and covered with animal skin. A person was lying on it, covered with a layer of linen. Looking at the complicated patterns, it should be from the drumming tribe. When Xiao Xian went in, the person was looking outside the window, but he turned his head to look at him. He should be a very young person, but he didn't seem to be in good condition. Not only was he thin, but he also didn't have any energy. It was just a small movement of turning his head, but it was very difficult for him to do it. It was like a rusty machine that was stuck. Every movement was like he was struggling to break free from something. Xiao Xian also noticed that when the person turned his head, the veins on his face, neck and exposed arms suddenly bulged. It looked like there were worms wriggling on them. Not only that, the bulging veins were very dark. This was not normal. The Jing people that Xiao Xian saw on his way here were not like this. When the person looked over, his eyes were not focused as if he couldn't see anyone. Was this the patient the shaman talked about? Father? The person on the bed called out. His voice was very soft. It looked like he just opened his mouth. If it wasn't for Xiao Xian's good hearing, he probably wouldn't have heard what he just said. So it was the shaman's son. No wonder the shaman was so emotional when he talked about him. It's okay. Father came to see you. Rest well. The Jing shaman walked over and carefully tidied up the messy hair of the person on the bed. Then he pulled up the linen cloth on the person's body slightly. It's almost night. Be careful of the cold. At this time of the year, even at night, the temperature was relatively high. Many tribesmen slept naked at night, but the one on the bed was not only sleeping on furry animal skin, but also covered with a thin quilt. He was seriously ill. Xiao Xian shifted his vision and looked at the person on the bed. Through the linen cloth and clothes, Xiao Xian could see the bones inside the man's body. Now, Xiao Xian could also see the meridians, but the color of the meridians was much lighter than that of the bones. Generally, Xiao Xian mainly looked at the bones. This time, Xiao Xian discovered that this person's bones did not have much of a problem. There were signs of fractures, but they had gone through a recovery period. It was just that they had not fully recovered. Even so, this kind of injury was not enough to put this person in such a situation. The problem was the messy meridians in his body. In the human body, blood flowed through the meridians from the internal organs to the surface of the skin. When a totemic warrior used his totemic power, a large part of the totemic power flowed through the meridians and circulated throughout the body. If the meridians were damaged, then they would not be able to use their totemic power normally. Without totemic power, a totemic warrior was no different from an unawakened person. But this person in front of him was not only unable to use his totemic power, he could not even maintain the most basic of daily activities. When the Jing shaman came out of the house, his eyes were still red. He would only show this kind of emotion in front of his son. After leaving the house and walking for a while, the Jing shaman asked his wife, who wanted to speak but was hesitating, "How is he today?" The woman's eyes dimmed. "He only drank some water. During the disaster last year, the Jing tribe was affected. The Jing shaman's son Miao was also injured at that time. He was injured while trying to save a few children in the tribe. Because of this, the Jing shaman didn't see the children's families for a year. He didn't speak to them at all. The injuries in Miao's body were caused by overusing his totemic power. It was like a road. Overloaded cars kept passing through the road, causing the road to collapse. Some parts of the road even collapsed completely. The parts that didn't collapse could barely maintain their daily activities such as walking and eating. But soon Miao's injuries worsened. In the end, he couldn't even walk anymore. This kind of situation would only worsen if it couldn't be fixed. First, he couldn't move his legs. Then, there were problems with his internal organs. He ate less and less food. Even if he forced himself to eat more, he would vomit it out. There was one time when he almost choked to death. After that, he couldn't even move his arms. Until now, he can only move his head. He eats less and less. 10 days ago he could still drink fish soup. Now he can't even drink soup. He can only drink water. The woman's voice was choked with sobs when she spoke. Although the Jing shaman wasn't as emotional, he couldn't hide the sadness on his face. It was obvious that he cared a lot about his son. The Jing shaman knew that the Gu shaman hoped that they could get more food and tools from the Yanjiao people. But what he cared about the most wasn't food and tools. It was his son who was still lying on the bed. He had a bright future, but because of a catastrophe he could only lie on the bed every day. He would rather the people in the tribe die than let his son suffer such serious injuries. The Jing shaman was never a generous person. He was biased and selfish. He never hid his true nature. Logically speaking, the Jing tribe wouldn't let the true I be passed on to outsiders. But for his son, the Jing shaman didn't care about that. No one in the tribe dared to go against him. Even if the ancestors who passed away jumped out to stop him, he would still do as he wished. The decision he made was the final one. Elder Xiao Xian, do you have any ideas? The Jing shaman suppressed the sadness in his heart and stared straight at the Xiao Xian. He didn't want to miss any slight change in the Xiao Xian's expression. The Xiao Xian didn't say anything. He lowered his eyes and thought. If it was an epidemic or poisoning, he could take out the medicine that the Guizhe gave him and try it out. But Miao's injuries were caused by severe damage to his meridians. The Xiao Xian didn't dare to say anything about other things, but if it was a meridian injury, there was definitely a way to treat it. Many Yanjiao people who were injured in the earthquake last year had severe damage to their meridians. According to the treatment methods of many tribes, they might cripple their limbs or even endanger their lives. But with the veins of the sky, things were different. Not only could they save their limbs, but they could also save their lives. However, the veins of the sky had experienced the Great Migration and 2 transplants in Yanjiao. Ever since they were planted, they had been carefully cared for. When they were first transplanted, they weren't in good condition. So everyone decided not to touch them for the next 2 years. They would only touch them after the transplanted veins of the sky had adapted to the new environment. Last year, the veins of the sky that the injured people in the tribe ate was actually the one that the Xiao Xian had first dug up as an experiment. Later on, part of the veins of the sky was eaten by the tribesmen, and the other part was given to the shaman and the Guizhe to experiment on pills. After all, the veins of the sky that were dug up didn't have a long shelf life. They tried their best to preserve the medicinal properties of the veins of the sky. In the end, only 5 pills were made. The current chief and shaman each had 1, the 2 team leaders each had 1, and the last one was in the Xiao Xian's hands. He had brought it with him this time. But there was only 1. Seeing the Xiao Xian like this, the Jing shaman's eyes flashed. If it can be cured, I'll find the eye for you. The Shaoxian looked up at the Jing shaman. Can you really find it? Yes. The Jing shaman stood up excitedly and vowed, as long as it can cure Miao, I'll find it for you. How many can you find? The Shaoxian asked. One. Afraid that the Shaoxian would misunderstand, the Jing shaman quickly explained, it's very difficult to find the true eye. It's already rare to find one every year. It's impossible for two to appear at the same time. So it was called the true eye. The Shaoxian asked again, since it's hard to find one every year, how can you guarantee that you'll find one this year? I haven't looked for the true eye this year, but I can try. The full moon is coming soon, and the chances of the true eye appearing then are the highest. The Jing shaman explained. I see, the Shaoxian nodded. I have a medicine that might help with Miao's injuries. But we only have one in our entire team. I understand. The Jing shaman interrupted. If you want the true eye, I'll find it for you. If I can't find one this year, I'll continue next year. I swear on my name, if you can cure my son's illness, I'll definitely find the true eye for you. I'm not sure if your son's injuries can be used. You can try. Don't worry, Elder Shaoxian. Even if I can't cure Miao, as long as he can walk like a normal person and continue to live, I'll find the true eye for you. The Jing shaman said seriously. It was rare to see hope, so he wouldn't give up. The Shaoxian was silent for a while, then said, I don't have the medicine with me. I'll go get it first. Sure. The Jing shaman was very enthusiastic. Do you need me to send someone over? No, I'll be back soon. The Shaoxian stood up. The Jing shaman hurriedly led the way. After personally leading the Shaoxian out, he followed him for a while. If it weren't for the tribesmen reporting that the Ye tribe was coming, he would have followed the Shaoxian to the river to get the medicine. The Ye tribe? What are they doing here? The Jing shaman watched the Shaoxian walk towards the river bank, then turned and walked away unhappily. The Ye tribe also had underground caves here, so they were all old acquaintances. Two Ye tribesmen came over. They were brothers called Deepai and Deepa. When the Jing shaman walked over, the two of them were still in disbelief. The Yinjiao people got here before us. Why are you here? The Jing shaman asked. We're just afraid that you'll get into a conflict with the Yinjiao people. Deepai took out a cloth scroll and threw it over. Jing gave this to you. Didn't he already write one? The Jing shaman took the cloth scroll and looked at it. His mouth twitched. What's the point of telling me now? The Jing shaman remembered that the cloth scroll he gave the Yinjiao didn't mention anything about the true eye. He was also worried that the Jing shaman would get angry if the Yinjiao mentioned the true eye. After all, the Jing shaman's temper had worsened because of Miao. He hadn't been in a good mood for the past year. He didn't want to explode when something like this happened. That was why the Jing shaman asked the Ye tribesmen to come over and wrote a letter. Unfortunately, the two Ye tribesmen were one step behind the Yinjiao people. Okay, I know. I've already talked to the Yinjiao Grand Elder. They didn't fight, Deepa muttered. His tone sounded regretful. The Jing shaman ignored him and pretended that he was talking nonsense. Hey, if we didn't bring the letter, would you have let the Yinjiao people into your tribe so easily? Aren't you afraid of being tricked by the cloth scroll they gave you? I heard that the Yinjiao people are very strong. You can't beat them, Deepai asked. You think I'm stupid? The Jing shaman glanced at them disdainfully and said meaningfully, I have eyes. I can see. We have eyes too. The two brothers said in unison. The Jing shaman smiled. Let me tell you a joke. The Ye tribesmen have eyes. Deepai and Deepa were speechless. So what if you have good eyesight? So what if you have 3 eyes? The two brothers snorted unhappily and dug into the ground again. Underground was more suitable for them. They didn't need to see clearly under the Yangguang. They only needed to be sharp enough in the dark underground. Chapter 659. The pill made from the roots of the veins of the sky was about the size of a pinky finger, but the veins of the sky only made up 1/10 of it. The remaining 90% was made up of other supplementary herbs. Some were used as buffers to reduce the side effects of the medicine if it was too strong. This was to prevent people with weak bodies from being unable to withstand the effects of the medicine too quickly. Some were used to maintain the effects of the veins of the sky for a longer period of time. In other words, it was to increase the shelf life of the medicine. As for the bottle that contained the veins of the sky, it wasn't made of bronze, pottery, or stone. It was made of jade. According to the Guizhe, jade had the best preservation effect. Although the Jing shaman had never seen jade before, he could tell that the bottle was very valuable. He couldn't tell why, but he could only see the conclusion. The Xiaoxian poured out the pill. Give him half of it first and see how it works. Miao couldn't swallow the medicine right now, so the small half of the pill was ground up and put into water. Then he poured it out bit by bit for the person on the bed to drink. The Jing shaman and his wife took care of Miao carefully. After all, Miao's injuries were very serious. Before, he would vomit everything he drank except for water. Now, the Jing shaman and his wife could only try to feed him little by little. The Xiaoxian saw that the wooden spoon was even smaller than his pinky nail. After feeding him a few spoonfuls, the Jing shaman saw that Miao didn't vomit out the medicine he swallowed this time. He was overjoyed. This was a good sign. After feeding him the medicine, the Jing shaman brought the Xiaoxian to walk around the tribe and told him how the true eye came to be. Normal ground eye stones and universal eye stones will be in the quagmire outside, but the true eye will only be here. The Jing shaman pointed at his feet. I think you already guessed it. The Jing shaman was in a good mood, so it was rare for him to be so talkative. The better the ground eye, the closer it is to the fire pit. The Jing fire pit was in the middle of the quagmire. The Xiaoxian stood in the house and could see a muddy yellow light not far away. It wasn't bright, but it was hard to ignore. Even if the fire seed was just a spark, it could be felt immediately. Actually, the Jing fire seed wasn't strong, but it was special. Their fire seed was very attractive to creatures like the ground eyes. Ground eyes lived underground and no one knew how deep they could go. Very few people could dig them out. Even the tribesmen who lived underground all year round had never dug them out. However, in the Jing tribe, those strange creatures that lived underground would appear on their own. The Jing tribe's large swamp was actually for those ground eyes. Sometimes, those ground eyes would swim around in the swamp, and the Jing people would catch those ground eyes. They would eat their flesh and leave the ground eye stones inside. To some extent, the Jing people often hunted, but they didn't hunt wild beasts. Instead, they hunted the ground eyes in the quagmire. So they were hunting in the quagmire. Xiaoxian saw some Jing children squatting by the quagmire and stirring it with wooden sticks. He thought they were digging for earthworms, but it turned out that they were practicing hunting ground eyes. That day, the Jing tribe served Xiaoxian and the others bowls of ground eye soup. The ground eye was a spindle-shaped creature with a hard shell. When it moved underground, it would spin and move forward. That was why there were obvious spiral patterns on its hard shell. After breaking open the hard shell, the meat inside would be used to cook, and the ground eye stones would be taken out. Ground eye meat was the Jing tribe's highest grade food. If they weren't important guests, they wouldn't serve this to them. The Jing shaman let people serve Xiaoxian and the others some ground eye meat to show their welcome. This was already considered the Jing tribe's highest level of etiquette. The Jing people mainly caught ground eyes from the large circle of quagmire outside the quagmire. They would sink the nets they used to catch the ground eyes, then fish them out again. It seemed simple, but in reality they could only catch one ground eye every 10 times. Those with good eyesight had a higher success rate, but those with bad eyesight had a harder time. The muddy water made it impossible for people to see what was underneath. Perhaps only experienced people could accurately cast the nets. The Jing shaman mainly brought Xiaoxian and the others to the central quagmire. The true eye only appeared here. To determine whether there was a true eye here, the Jing shaman only needed to look. He opened the third eye between his eyebrows. It was a dark brown eye. It didn't look much different from the Jing shaman's own eyes, except that the color was a little darker. However, this eye was vertically long. It was at a 90-degree angle with the Jing shaman's two normal eyes. When it blinked, the eyelids would open and close. This special eye had a strange penetrating power. When you looked into that eye, it seemed like it could see through people and see things that other people couldn't. The Jing shaman opened that eye and looked around the quagmire. He shook his head regretfully. I didn't see any ground eyes with true eyes. I'll come back tomorrow. Don't worry, I'll definitely find one for you. He was afraid that the Xiaoxian would stop the supply of medicine, so the Jing shaman was very enthusiastic about finding the true eye. However, there were some things that the Jing shaman still said after some hesitation. I can only guarantee that I'll find the true eye. If 1 year isn't enough, then 2 years. If 2 years isn't enough, then 10 years. However, I can't guarantee that you'll be able to successfully place it on a fearsome beast. Even most of the Jing people can't successfully merge it with a beast. The Jing shaman was afraid that the Xiaoxian was just using the fearsome beast as an excuse, so he emphasized again, anyway, you can't use it on a human. I know. I won't use it on a human. I'm just trying it on a fearsome beast. No matter how high the chances of success are, we still have to try. The Jing shaman nodded and didn't say anything else. He had already reminded the Jing shaman. He didn't care if the other person listened or not. He was only responsible for finding the true eye. After walking around the quagmire for a while, the Jing shaman suggested to the Xiao Xian, finding the true eye isn't something that can be done in 1 or 2 days. Elder Xiao Xian, do you want me to send it to the Yinjiao tribe after I find it, or do you want to wait here for a few more days? You know, the night of the full moon will arrive in 3 days. At that time the true eye is most likely to appear. All right. After hearing the Xiao Xian's reply, the Jing shaman's face lit up with joy. The reason why he said this was because he hoped that the Xiao Xian would stay here for a while. At least, he wanted to wait until his son's injuries were healed before he left. As for whether he could really find the true eye that day, even he wasn't sure. He only said that it was possible. If he was unlucky, he would have to continue waiting. But if Xiao Xian wanted to leave by then, the Jing shaman wouldn't stop him. Since the Xiao Xian decided to stay here for a few more days, the Yinjiao people started hunting. There were many beasts in this area that the Jing people didn't want to provoke. The Yinjiao people went to take care of those beasts, and the Jing people were happy to see that. They didn't feel like their prey was stolen. Most of the beasts they hunted were wild beasts. Although the Yinjiao people didn't care about them, to the Jing people they were still quite attractive. Duo Li and the others used the beasts they hunted to trade with the Jing people for some normal ground eye stones and ground eye meat. However, even if the Jing people had universal eyes, they didn't have many of them. Plus, the Jing shaman had to approve the trade. If the Jing shaman didn't allow them to trade with universal eyes, they wouldn't take them out no matter what. After the Jing shaman knew about this, he only thought for a while. Then he waved his hand and approved the trade. So, those who had hunted down universal eyes and kept them, and those who were willing to trade went to the Yinjiao people to negotiate. They could trade with the Yinjiao people for fearsome beast meat, beast hides, horns and teeth. Originally, Duo Li and the others thought that after the Jing shaman allowed it, the Jing people would be very willing to trade with them. However, the reality was that the number of people who were willing to trade with universal eyes could be counted on one hand. Among the normal ground eye stones they were willing to trade, there weren't many that were of high quality. However, Duo Li and the others didn't care about the ground eye stones that were of lower quality. Because of this, even after the Jing shaman agreed to the trade, Duo Li and the others' gains were still pitifully small. I really don't understand. Why did they hide those stones? Duo Li looked at the 2 universal eyes in his hand with a conflicted expression. These were the results of his 2 days of trading. He only had 2. There were hundreds of normal ground eye stones in the wooden box beside him. Those were the best of the best, but compared to what the Jing people had, it wasn't even 1/20th of them. They don't travel far, so they don't need the universal eyes. They don't even want to trade the ground eye stones that are slightly better. Why did they hide them? They can't be eaten. Tuo and the others were also very confused. They really didn't understand what the Jing people were thinking. Xiao Xian got the answer to this question from the Jing shaman. To the Jing people, the ground eye stones were wealth and also their spiritual food. The more valuable the ground eye stones they had, the more satisfied they would be. In the Jing people's history, there were even people who would rather starve to death with a box of ground eye stones than trade it for food with other tribes. This was impossible for the Yinjiao people. The Yinjiao people also couldn't understand the Jing people's different values. No wonder I've never seen any ground eye stones in the outside world, Xiao Xian sighed. Maybe some tribes used to have ground eye stones, but ever since the Jing people moved here 1,000 years ago, they didn't interact much with the outside world. After a long time, the ground eye stones passed their expiration date and started to die. Gradually, no more ground eye stones appeared in the outside world. However, if you like it, Elder Xiao Xian, I can give you another box. That's my private collection, the Jing shaman said with a smile. His son's condition was getting better, so the Jing shaman was in a better mood. On this day, Xiao Xian gave the last bit of medicine to the Jing shaman. Miao could now eat some liquid food. He looked a lot better, not as lifeless as he was the day before. His eyes were also brighter and he could focus when he looked at people. How is it? The Jing shaman asked Miao nervously. I can see now. Miao's voice was still not loud, but it was better than the day before when he could only talk. Really? Good. The Jing shaman was overjoyed. He thought of something and moved Xiao Xian out from behind him. He introduced him to Miao. This is the Grand Elder of the Yinjiao tribe, Xiao Xian. It's all thanks to his medicine that you can recover. Miao looked at Xiao Xian when he heard this. Actually, every time the Jing shaman brought Xiaoxian here, he would know. It was only because his eyes had been injured for a long time that he couldn't see. This was the first time he saw Xiaoxian with his own eyes. However, just as Miao was about to thank him, his gaze on Xiaoxian froze. The smile on his face froze. Miao closed his eyes and looked at Xiaoxian again. He forced a stiff smile and said dryly, "Thank you, Elder Xiaoxian." Miao then said, "I can see now. It's still hard to see things, so it's not very clear." This was an explanation for his loss of composure just now. Xiaoxian looked at Miao and Miao averted his eyes. Xiaoxian looked at the Jing shaman again. The Jing shaman smiled apologetically, then turned to his wife and said, "Bring Elder Xiaoxian to see the gift I've prepared." The gift he was talking about was the box of ground eye stones that he wanted to give to Xiaoxian. Xiaoxian followed the woman out of the room. Before he left, he looked back at the Jing shaman and his son before leaving. After Xiaoxian left, the Jing shaman closed the wooden plank that acted as the door and walked to the bedside. Miao's hands under the linen cloth were clenched tightly because of nervousness. He only let go after Xiaoxian left. His palms were sweaty. "Father," behind him there's, "Sure, it's enough that you know. Don't say it out loud." After Xiaoxian followed the Jing shaman's wife to get a box of ground eye stones, he didn't stay there any longer. Instead, he went to look for the other Yinjiao people. Duo Li and the others were watching the Jing people teach the children how to catch ground eye stones. When they saw Xiaoxian come over, they were about to express their thoughts when Xiaoxian asked, "Is there anything strange on me?" No. Duo Li was confused. He didn't understand why Xiaoxian suddenly asked this. "What about behind you?" Xiaoxian turned around and looked at Duo Li. Then he looked at the others. They all shook their heads as if they didn't see anything strange. That was strange. What did the Jing shaman and his son see? Xiaoxian knew that Miao's gaze wasn't fixed on him, but behind him. His gaze wasn't focused on Xiaoxian but on his surroundings. What did he mean by, he just recovered his vision and couldn't see clearly? Chapter 660. Xiaoxian knew that the Jing shaman and his son must have seen something, but they didn't want to talk about it. Soon it was the day of the full moon. There wasn't much difference between night and day. Even at night, it was still bright because of the moon. The change between night and day, the rotation of the sun and the moon. Anything related to the sun and the moon would change on this day. Just like how the drumming tribe used to harvest water moonstones on this day, the Jing people were also very busy because the ground eyes would be very active on this day. They would even float above the quagmire. The Jing people were already waiting by the quagmire early in the morning. Some of them were holding tightly woven nets, while others were holding tools made from horns and bones. At first they were just waiting by the quagmire with long tools. If they saw a ground eye coming out of the quagmire, they would immediately attack. Those who were fast enough would use the long scoop to scoop up the ground eye the moment it appeared. This was the only day they could use this method to catch a ground eye quickly. Xiaoxian saw a Jing warrior shout excitedly after he scooped up the ground eye. He poured out the thing in the scoop far away from the quagmire. A spindle-shaped object about the length of a palm was poured out along with the muddy water. As it spun, the muddy water was flung out quickly, revealing a dark gray shell on its body. That was the ground eye. Seeing it trying to drill into the ground, the Jing warrior quickly used a bone knife to push it to the side, then threw a rock at it. Their attacks were very accurate. The rock landed on one side of the ground eye, not in the middle of the ground eye's body. If they didn't use the right amount of force, the spindle-shaped ground eye would fly out. But if they used the right amount of force, the rock would only make the spinning ground eye half dead. The ground eye would also stop spinning. That way the ground eye would lose its ability to move. They could just put it aside or cut it open. Xiaoxian saw that person cut open the ground eye they just caught. Under the dark gray shell, the flesh was white. When the flesh was cut open, they would see the round ball in the middle of the ground eye's body. That was the ground eye stone. Because there were too many people gathered here, Xiaoxian couldn't see the quality of the stone inside the ground eye that person cut open. But from the cheers in the crowd, he knew that it was a good stone. Every year at this time, the person who caught the most ground eyes with the best quality would be recorded in the Jing tribe's history book. It would be passed down to the next generation along with the shaman's notes. This was an honor that every Jing person yearned for. To the Jing people, this was a winner in life. Not only would their name be recorded in history, but their status in the tribe would also rise. No wonder everyone in the Jing tribe was so excited. With the first person to catch a ground eye today, the others didn't want to be left behind. Around the outer circle of the quagmire, you could see the Jing people running around. The children who didn't have the ability to catch a ground eye were watching from the sidelines. Once they heard that someone had caught a ground eye, they would run over to watch the show and guess who would be the winner this year. Inside the shaman's house, the father and son were talking about this year's full moon's night. Miao could now walk with the help of others, but he couldn't walk for long distances yet. Proper exercise could reduce the side effects of being bedridden for a year, but too much was as bad as not enough. If he rushed for results, he would only get half the result with twice the effort. Not only would he not be able to recover quickly, but it would also increase the burden on his body before he fully recovered. The shaman helped Miao walk around the house a few times and then sat down to rest. If you weren't injured, you would have definitely gotten first place this year. The shaman's words carried a hint of regret. Miao didn't feel any regret. It's okay. Next year is fine too. It's just a year late. That's true. You're already very lucky to be able to recover. Oh yeah, Dad, are you going to find the true eye for that person in Yinjiao tonight? Miao asked. Of course. It'll be best if you can find it. If not, I'll probably have to wait another year. After all, the chances of finding the true eye at other times are too low. Don't worry. Even if you can't find it this year, that person won't blame me. The shaman comforted him. Miao's brows didn't relax because of the shaman's words. Dad, who's behind that person? Is it one of Yinjiao's ancestors? Maybe. Those who have the ancestors' protection are always very lucky. Maybe we'll really find the true eye this year. Speaking of which, when I saw it, I was so scared that I almost opened my eyes. Miao's heart was still pounding. At that time, I felt a piercing pain in my eyes. They haven't completely healed yet. Hearing this, the shaman immediately became nervous. Your eyes are injured? Let me see. Totemic patterns appeared on Miao's body. Because his injuries hadn't completely healed, he carefully controlled the totemic patterns to only circulate above his torso when he used his totemic power. The greenish-black meridians protruded and mixed with the totemic patterns that appeared, looking very scary. At the same time, a crack appeared between Miao's eyebrows. Just like how the shaman opened his third eye when he was searching for the true eye for Shaoxian, the third eye that appeared between Miao's eyebrows also opened. In the entire Jing tribe, other than the shaman, no one else knew that Miao had a third eye. His third eye appeared the year he awakened his totemic power. At that time, the shaman was quite shocked. After asking around, he analyzed the reason for Miao's current condition. It might be because he ate a ground eye that didn't have a ground eye stone before he awakened his totemic power. Miao had caught that ground eye by himself when he was setting up a net under the quagmire. It was quite big and it had also been a full moon day. After Miao had caught it, it had aroused the curiosity of many people. Everyone had said that they might find a universal eye, but who would have thought that after cutting it open there would be nothing? Not even the most basic ground eye. However, not long after that, after Miao awakened his totemic power, a third eye appeared between his eyebrows. The shaman guessed that the ground eye that Miao ate probably had a ground eye stone, but its ground eye stone was special. It was hidden and couldn't be touched or seen. Just like the third eye on Miao's body, unless he opened it on his own, there wouldn't be any trace of it. He was no different from the others in the tribe. The shaman planned to wait until he was old and Miao was strong enough to take over the tribe. Then he would catch a true eye to hide it and let the tribesmen know about Miao's third eye. Who knew that the world would change last year, and Miao would almost die in that disaster. The shaman felt that all his hopes had collapsed. Luckily, work harder this year. Even if you don't find a true eye, catch a few more universal eyes. Treat it as a thank you gift. The shaman still wanted to be on good terms with the Shaoxian. It had nothing to do with the Yinjiao tribe, but it was because of the blurry figure behind Shaoxian. The shaman looked at Miao's third eye carefully and didn't find anything strange. Move your eyeball and try to see what's outside. Can you see anything? The shaman asked. Yes. Miao could see through the wooden house's floorboards and the blurry figures in the quagmire. Those were all ground eyes. He could even see further outside the house at the quagmire, the tribesmen who were busy working. He could see the Yinjiao people standing around and watching. The Shaoxian, who was watching someone dissect a ground eye, suddenly raised his head and looked in a certain direction. What's wrong? Tura asked. Nothing. The Shaoxian retracted his gaze and continued to look at the ground eye that was dissected. It was still a ground eye stone and its quality was decent. Inside the shaman's house, Miao's eyes were tightly shut as he covered his third eye. His face was pale. I've been discovered. Did you see Shaoxian? Didn't I tell you not to test him again? Although the shaman's words were reproachful, his expression was worried. he quickly looked at Mio's eye again. After confirming that it was just a slight pain and nothing else, he relaxed. At night, the sun disappeared but the sky was still bright. The silver moonlight made the ground as bright as day. Above them, a giant round plate hung high in the sky. When the two moons overlapped, the Jing tribesmen who had been guarding the quagmire began to walk into the quagmire. The quagmire outside the quagmire wasn't deep. Most of the adult Jing tribesmen could still breathe above the surface of the quagmire after they entered. This was calculated when they were digging the quagmire. There were even more ground eyes active in the quagmire. The Xiao Xian heard from the Jing tribesmen that the ground eyes from other places had entered the quagmire. After the full moon, most of the ground eyes in the quagmire would leave, so they had to take this opportunity to catch more. The net they threw out was traded from the drumming tribe. It was sturdier and was custom-made for catching ground eyes. The holes were smaller, so it was a type of net within a net. The more they drilled into the net, the tighter it would be. Unless there was a strong impact force that could break the net, they would be trapped in the net. Pulling the net in the quagmire required a lot of strength. Sometimes a 5-meter wide net would require more than 10 people to pull it together. The Yanjiao people watched on the side anxiously, but the Jing tribesmen refused to help. They had to catch the ground eyes themselves. The Xiao Xian didn't watch from the outer quagmire. Instead, he went to the central quagmire. There were ripples on the surface of the quagmire. It didn't stop. Something was moving underneath. The Xiao Xian heard a sound. It sounded like someone was putting a very thin straw into a cup of water and blowing at it quickly. That's the sound from the universal eye. It's only on this day that the universal eye will make such a sound. Knowing that there was a universal eye under the quagmire, the Jing shaman let out a sigh of relief. Now, even if he didn't see the true eye, he could at least catch the universal eye and comfort himself. The Jing shaman took off his coat and wrapped a few ropes around his hands. Then he walked into the quagmire. The central quagmire was much deeper than the outer quagmires. Once a person fell in, they wouldn't be able to see him at all. However, there were some stone steps that were placed in the quagmire when it was first built. If you couldn't hold your breath anymore, you could step on the stone steps to breathe. But the steps at the bottom of the quagmire couldn't be seen by normal people. Even if you knew where they were, once you entered the quagmire, you would be in complete darkness and lose your sense of direction. It would be difficult to find the steps. In the entire Jing tribe, the only people who could accurately find the steps under the quagmire were probably the shamans of each generation. This was because they had an eye that could see through the mud. Chapter 661. The Xiao Xian watched as the shaman's figure was quickly submerged by the mud after he entered the quagmire. The central quagmire didn't have the stench of mud. Even the outer quagmire had a rotten smell, but the central quagmire didn't have any other stench other than the most basic smell of mud. Even if there were plant seeds floating down here, even if those seeds could adapt to the muddy environment, there was not a single bit of green in the central quagmire. There were no plants growing here, just like a dead land. However, there were still many strange life forms active under this quagmire. It was said that the fire seed had a deterrent effect on beasts and insects, but there were always some exceptions, such as the drumming tribe's crocodiles and the Jing tribe's ground eyes. Not only were they not afraid of the fire seed, they would even gather around it. The people of the Jing tribe who were watching the shaman enter the quagmire were not worried. They believed in the shaman's abilities. The only thing they were worried about was whether the shaman could catch a universal eye. Until now, no one in the tribe had been able to catch a universal eye in the outer quagmire. As for the central quagmire, only the shaman with the highest status in the tribe and the 10 people with the most glorious achievements last year could enter. However, because of the disaster last year, the competition couldn't be held as scheduled. So this year the shaman still had to decide who could enter. But all of this had to wait until the shaman finished his task. Right now they could only watch from the side. Xiao Xian looked up at the shaman's house not far away. Mio didn't come out, but he knew that Mio could definitely see what was happening here. Xiao Xian was sure that the probing gaze from before belonged to Mio. The father and son were strange. Xiao Xian knew that they must have some secrets, but that was the Jing tribesman's business. He didn't want to ask too much. He just wanted to find the true eye. The strange sound in the quagmire was sometimes strong and sometimes weak. Its position was constantly changing and the speed was very fast. The better the stone, the harder it was to catch it. After the shaman entered the quagmire, he didn't immediately search for the universal eye. Instead, he carefully checked if the true eye was here. The true eye was harder to find than the universal eyes, and it was even harder to capture. Therefore, the shaman Jing had to focus all of his attention to investigate. Xiao Xian changed his field of vision. Through the muddy water, he could see the shaman's figure moving at the bottom of the quagmire. He could also see some bright spots moving quickly. There weren't many of them, but they were all very fast. One of the bright spots was the one that made the sound. According to the brightness, Xiao Xian guessed that the light spots were ground eye stones. The brighter the light spots, the higher the quality of the ground eye stones. The two brightest ones were the universal eye stones. However, one of them was silent, while the other was moving at high speed and making strange noises. Xiao Xian was looking at the quagmire when he suddenly sensed something. He looked in the direction of the crystal witchcraft house. That wounded man was being dishonest again. Miao, who was secretly using his third eye to observe the situation outside, was still curious even though he had been warned twice by his father. He knew that Xiao Xian would notice him and he knew what the result would be. He couldn't help but look in Xiao Xian's direction again. It was the first time he saw a shadow following behind someone. It was like another soul. He was too curious, but his father didn't allow him to ask too much. Just as he looked in Xiao Xian's direction, Xiao Xian also looked in his direction. Miao thought that it would be the same as before, but he quickly realized that he was wrong. Xiao Xian's eyes were like two spots of light. They were completely different from the previous two times. When he looked over, he had no choice but to close his eyes. Even though he closed them, he still felt like his eyes were being burned by fire. It hurt even more than the previous two times. He almost cried out in pain, but he was worried that the people outside would hear, so he could only grit his teeth and bear with it. He was the one who brought this upon himself, so he had to endure it. Even though he had avoided Xiao Xian's gaze, Miao could still feel those two eyes. They were like two pillars of fire with high temperature, trying to find out when they would come down on him. Only when Xiao Xian looked away did Miao feel his body lighten. The stiffness in his muscles slowly eased, and his back was covered in sweat. "That's too scary," Miao gasped. Xiao Xian's eyes weren't like this before. Why did they suddenly change? Yinjiao people didn't have a third eye, and there was nothing special about the others. It seemed that the problem lay with Xiao Xian. What kind of eyes are those? While Miao was trying to figure out what was going on with Xiao Xian's eyes, the crystal witchcraft shaman had finished his first lap. He stepped on the steps and popped his head out a few times. He walked around the quagmire in the middle of the circle, and finally walked out covered in mud. The crystal witchcraft shaman took a clean linen cloth from someone and wiped his eyes. Then he said to Xiao Xian regretfully, "I haven't seen anything yet. I'll go down and take a look after some rest." Because they didn't find anything, the crystal witchcraft shaman didn't allow the others to go down the quagmire. He was worried that they would scare away the ground eyes that were coming over. Since the crystal witchcraft shaman had spoken, the others naturally had to listen. They had nothing to do here anyway, so they went back to the quagmire in the outer circle to continue farming. "Can I go down and try?" Xiao Xian suddenly asked. The crystal witchcraft shaman, who was wiping the mud off his body, almost dropped the cloth in his hand when he heard this. "What?" The crystal witchcraft shaman asked again as if he didn't hear him clearly. Xiao Xian pointed at the quagmire in front of them and said again, "Can I go down and try?" The Jing people who were still watching looked at Xiao Xian as if they were looking at an idiot who wanted to die. You want to go down into the quagmire?" The crystal witchcraft shaman's face was full of disbelief. "Yes, can I?" Xiao Xian looked at the crystal witchcraft shaman. In the Jing tribe, only those who had the crystal witchcraft shaman's permission could enter the quagmire. He never said that outsiders were not allowed to enter, but generally speaking, outsiders who came here would definitely not want to go down into the quagmire. The fire seed's influence was one of the reasons. It was easy for people to lose their sense of direction in the quagmire. Although the quagmire was only this big and looked like a small lake, once you really went down, you would realize that it was completely different from what you imagined. It was as if you were in a vast swamp. Even the Jing people who had a strong sense of direction lost their sense of direction after entering the quagmire. No matter how they walked, they couldn't get to their expected location, let alone an outsider who made such a request. It wasn't that the crystal witchcraft shaman couldn't agree, but he was conflicted. If something happened to Xiao Xian after he went down into the quagmire, would the Yinjiao people take revenge on them? "Don't worry. If it's just a matter of direction, I can solve it," Xiao Xian said. If it was someone else who made this request, the crystal witchcraft shaman would definitely refuse without thinking, but the person who made this request was Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian just saved his son. Plus, Xiao Xian was a special person, so the crystal witchcraft shaman wanted to befriend him. Mio said that people who were protected by their ancestors were always lucky. The crystal witchcraft shaman thought for a while and then nodded in agreement. The other Jing people standing on the side all turned their heads to look at the crystal witchcraft shaman, as if he had done something crazy. But when the crystal witchcraft shaman glanced at them, they all looked away. They dared to look at Xiao Xian as if he was an idiot, but they didn't dare to look at the crystal witchcraft shaman that way. If you want to go down into the quagmire, you can. Although I don't know how you can find your way, just in case you should tie a rope, the crystal witchcraft shaman suggested. Even the Jing people didn't dare to go down into the quagmire. Other than the crystal witchcraft shaman, everyone else had to tie a rope to their bodies in case they couldn't find their way down. The people at the edge of the quagmire could pull the rope to remind the people inside if they couldn't find their way down. They could also pull the person out in time if they couldn't hold it in anymore. Tie it. If you can't find your way down there, I'll pull the rope to remind you, Wei said. Tuo and the others on the side nodded in agreement. After what happened in the drumming tribe, they realized that Xiao Xian seemed to be able to withstand the repulsion of the fire seed from other tribes. When he was in the drumming tribe, he could move freely without being disturbed. Now that he was in the Jing tribe, where the fire seed was weaker, he wouldn't be affected at all. That was why they didn't care too much about the fire seed. But after all, they were going down into the quagmire, so the risk was still high. Although Xiao Xian didn't think it was necessary, he still followed everyone's instructions and tied a rope around his body. There was nothing wrong with being cautious. Xiao Xian walked down the quagmire from where the shaman pointed. There was a slope that led downward slowly. People who entered the quagmire for the first time would go down from there. If they walked down the slope, they would need some time to get used to it. After all, the quagmire was different from a normal pond. It would be easier to move around after getting used to it. After Xiao Xian walked down, he realized that the further down he went, the more resistance he felt. After all, there was more water at the top of the quagmire and more mud at the bottom. The mud was sinking down. But what was different from other quagmires was that the quagmire here was more uniform. There wasn't a clear dividing line between water and mud. The middle part of the quagmire was filled with sticky mud. It didn't have any buoyancy. It only had a force that pulled people down slowly. As he went down further, Xiao Xian's entire body sank into the quagmire. He continued to walk forward until he touched the bottom of the quagmire. Then the force stopped. There were some swimming sounds around him. Some were very soft while others were very loud. A ground ice swished past Xiao Xian not far away. Even at the bottom of the quagmire, where the mud was thicker, it could still move so quickly. No wonder it was hard to catch. Xiao Xian even sensed that it had left a long hollow in the quagmire due to its fast speed. On top of the quagmire, the shaman looked at the Yinjiao people who were staring at the quagmire and asked, "Is your great elder really okay?" This question sounded like there was something wrong with our great elder's head. The Yinjiao people thought to themselves. "No problem, absolutely no problem," Wei said with a straight face. "That's close to the fire seed." The shaman could see with his third eye that Xiao Xian was already walking under the quagmire. Wei turned his head to look at the shaman and said carelessly, "Your tribe's fire seed isn't strong." The shaman was speechless. Don't say something so offensive to the tribe. He finally understood how the two brothers Deepai and Deepa felt when they were mocked in the eye. "Sai, that's not right." The shaman suddenly realized that his worries were completely wrong. What he should be worried about now was whether or not the kid in the quagmire would attack his tribe's fire seed. How could he be so careless? The shaman felt that he had done something stupid. Chapter 662. Because Xiao Xian had saved his son, and because he was special as a shaman of a tribe, the caution and wariness he should have as a tribe's shaman had been cast aside. He was too careless. Even if he felt that Xiao Xian wasn't that kind of person, he shouldn't have acted based on his personal opinion when it came to the fire seed. The Jing shaman fell silent. Although he didn't show it on his face, he was already starting to feel anxious. He stared straight at the quagmire. If anyone below made any strange movements, he would immediately take action. Mio, who was in the house, had already recovered. Although his vision was still blurry when he opened his eyes, it wasn't a big deal. He didn't want to be treated the same way again, but he still couldn't suppress his curiosity. If Xiao Xian hadn't entered the quagmire, he wouldn't have provoked Xiao Xian. But now that Xiao Xian had entered the quagmire, Mio also wanted to know what an outsider like him could do in the quagmire. He didn't want to be rescued when he got lost at the bottom of the quagmire. Luckily, Xiao Xian didn't look over this time. This made Mio heave a sigh of relief. Xiao Xian's eyes were too scary. At this moment, the Xiao Xian had already focused all his attention on sensing the movements around him. The Jing shaman's third eye could open normally in the quagmire, and he could see things without being disturbed by the muddy water at the bottom of the quagmire. However, the Xiao Xian couldn't. The Jing shaman's third eye was special and he couldn't compare. The muddy water would damage the eyes, so after being dragged to the bottom of the quagmire, the Xiao Xian kept his eyes closed. Luckily, with his special vision, even with his eyes closed, the Xiao Xian could still see the situation around him through his eyelids. This was something the others didn't know. After sinking to the bottom of the quagmire, the Xiao Xian didn't immediately move. Instead, he stood quietly on the spot and observed the situation around him. Under the quagmire, the pressure from the muddy water around him was at least twice as much as that of a normal river or lake. Moreover, this was the pressure he felt when he was still. If he wanted to lift his feet and walk under the quagmire, he would need to expend even more energy. This was also why the shaman was so tired that he had to come ashore to rest after only taking a slow walk under the quagmire. In Xiao Xian's vision, the ground eyes around him were glowing dots of light. Some were bright, some were dark. They were all ground eyes, and those glowing dots were actually the ground eye stones inside the ground eyes' bodies. In Xiao Xian's vision, ordinary ground eye stones were dull gray. Only high-quality ground eye stones and universal eyes were brighter, especially the universal eyes, which were especially bright. When the universal eye passed by Xiao Xian, it left behind a trail of light in Xiao Xian's vision. Based on this pattern, Xiao Xian only needed to search for the brightest spot. Xiao Xian didn't know how the true eye looked like, but he knew how bright the universal eyes were. What he needed to do now was to search for a spot in the quagmire that was brighter than the two universal eyes from before. Then he needed to catch it. Although he didn't know if the true eye could be used on Caesar, he still had to try. Caesar still followed the hunting team out to hunt in the tribe, but his mobility was still lacking compared to before. Especially in the forest full of danger and fierce beasts, his mobility was greatly restricted. Every time old Ku saw Caesar's injuries, he wondered if he should let Caesar change professions. For example, pulling carts at the Flaming River trading point. Unfortunately, Caesar wasn't willing. Pulling carts was just a part-time job. He liked to hunt more. Now that he was hungry, he would go out to the forest to look for food. He even brought food for old Ku. If he could give that guy an eye, even if he couldn't recover to his peak condition, as long as he was better than now, it would be worth Xiao Xian's visit. Beside the quagmire, everyone saw that after Xiao Xian went down he didn't move. The rope tied to Xiao Xian's body also stopped moving. Could he be trapped by the mud at the bottom of the quagmire? Is that why he can't move? Someone whispered. Bullshit, how strong can the mud in the quagmire be? It's impossible to trap us Yinjiao tribesmen. He's just walking around in the quagmire. How could such a small thing trouble our grand elder? Duo Li refuted without hesitation. But they didn't understand why Xiao Xian didn't move after he went down either. Hey, it's moving. It's moving. Someone suddenly shouted. Everyone looked over. The rope tied to Xiao Xian's body was indeed moving. This meant that Xiao Xian was starting to walk around in the quagmire. It also proved that what Duo Li said was true. Although the Jing tribesmen didn't say anything, they didn't agree with Duo Li's words. Just walking around in the quagmire? Such a small thing? If it was that simple, then the Jing tribesmen wouldn't have so many restrictions on the central quagmire. Others didn't know, but many of the Jing elders knew. When the central quagmire was first dug, it was used as a second line of defense for the Jing tribe. If there was any danger, the Jing tribesmen would retreat into the central quagmire to seek refuge. This quagmire had swallowed countless beasts. However, the beasts that were swallowed into the quagmire had already become a part of it. Not even their bones were left behind. Xiao Xian also realized that after he sank to the bottom of the quagmire, his originally sharp sense of direction seemed to have been blocked. If it weren't for his special vision that allowed him to see the traps at the bottom of the quagmire, Xiao Xian might have really gotten lost in the quagmire. He had been standing at the bottom of the quagmire for a while now, so he got used to the pressure and resistance. He also had a basic understanding of the environment, but now Xiao Xian needed some fresh air, so he walked towards the stairs at the bottom of the quagmire. There were stairs made of stones at the bottom of the quagmire. After he stepped on them, he would be able to emerge from the quagmire. The Jing shaman, who was standing outside the quagmire, originally wanted to tell the Yinjiao people where to pull the rope to remind Xiao Xian. However, he saw the rope tied to Xiao Xian move towards the stairs before the Yinjiao people pulled it. Seeing this, the Jing shaman couldn't help but open his three eyes wide. He looked at the bottom of the quagmire again and saw Xiao Xian walking towards the stairs. He didn't have any intention to test it out. His footsteps were steady as if he was sure there were stairs there. How was this possible? The Jing shaman couldn't understand. Xiao Xian didn't have a third eye, so how did he find the stairs so accurately? Before Xiao Xian entered the quagmire, he had pointed out the stairs to Xiao Xian, but everyone in the Jing tribe knew that even if they could clearly identify the place outside the quagmire, once they entered the quagmire, it was as if their memories were messed up, and they kept going in the wrong direction. Seeing Xiao Xian's head emerge from the quagmire, the Yinjiao people let out a sigh of relief. Wei and the others, whose faces were tense, also smiled. Duo Li looked proudly at the Jing people who were watching. His eyes seemed to be telling them, "Did you see that? I wasn't lying, right?" Xiao Xian raised his hand to wipe the mud off his face. He said to Wei and the others, "Throw me a rope. I'll tie my hands." The Jing shaman looked at Xiao Xian in surprise. "You want to catch it yourself?" "Yes, there was a universal eye that passed by me just now. It was the one that made the sound. If I can't find the true eye, I'll catch a universal eye first." Xiao Xian caught the rope that was thrown over. This was what the Jing people often used to tie their hands. After tying the rope around their hands, even if the ground eye spun very fast with the rope's protection, they wouldn't hurt their hands directly. This rope was used as a glove. The Jing shaman opened his mouth. He wasn't sad that the Xiao Xian had taken the universal eye. He promised to let Xiao Xian go down, so he didn't care much about the universal eyes in the quagmire. What he was surprised about was that Xiao Xian didn't lose his sense of direction at the bottom of the quagmire. Not only could he walk freely, but he also planned to catch the universal eyes. "Alright, be careful." The Jing shaman didn't say anything else. He felt that Xiao Xian only found the universal eye because of its sound. If that was the case, then he could continue to sit by the quagmire and watch the show. If Xiao Xian caught the universal eye, then even if he couldn't find the true eye, he wouldn't be angry. It was better to have something than nothing. If Xiao Xian couldn't catch the universal eye, then he would catch it for Xiao Xian after he rested for a while. The more the Jing shaman thought about it, the more he felt that this was a good thing. He continued to sit by the side and watched as Xiao Xian took a deep breath and sank into the quagmire again. As for the true eye, in the Jing shaman's opinion, Xiao Xian definitely wouldn't be able to catch it. Even if there was a true eye next to Xiao Xian, he wouldn't be able to find it. A true eye wouldn't make that kind of sound. He still had to rely on the Jing tribe. After confirming that Xiao Xian wasn't in any trouble, the Yinjiao people started joking around. They even chatted with the Jing people about who had the highest chance of getting first place this year. While they were chatting, they didn't forget to promote the Flaming River trading point. They told them that if they needed food or animal hides in the future, they could go there and trade with ground eye stones. Xiao Xian, who was at the bottom of the quagmire, had already started to follow the Jing shaman's footsteps and walk along the quagmire. As the Jing shaman, he was naturally more experienced. Xiao Xian walked along the Jing shaman's path. It was probably the safest and least likely route to miss the target. The mud at the bottom of the quagmire made Xiao Xian feel like he was walking against the wind. Even if he stopped, he wouldn't be blown away. If he was tired, he could still rest. It was just that he couldn't breathe fresh air, so he felt a little suffocated. Every once in a while, he would have to find a platform to breathe. The full moon was in the sky. As Xiao Xian walked around the quagmire, he realized that there were more and more ground eyes in the middle of the quagmire. Some ground eyes crawled out from the walls of the quagmire, while others crawled out from under the carpet. On the ground eyes from other places were gathering here. The Jing fire seed was especially attractive to them on this day. They were like moths attracted to a flame in the dark night, rushing towards the Jing fire seed. That was why in Xiao Xian's vision, there were more and more light spots. There was one more universal eye. The night was still long, so there might be more universal eyes crawling out. The Jing shaman said that tonight was the most active night of the year for ground eyes. He just didn't know if he would be able to see a true eye. The Jing shaman opened his third eye wide. When he saw Xiao Xian walk past a universal eye floating in the quagmire, he couldn't help but smile. Sure enough, that kid was just judging by the sound. But then, the policeman saw the universal eye that was spinning rapidly in the quagmire. It walked past Xiao Xian several times, but Xiao Xian didn't move at all. The Jing shaman was puzzled. If it happened once or twice, he could say that the kid didn't react in time. But 3, 4, 5 times? What was that kid thinking? Chapter 663. Xiao Xian walked at the bottom of the quagmire. His speed wasn't fast, but it was the same as when the shaman was at the bottom of the quagmire. He did plan to catch a universal eye if he couldn't find a true eye. That way his trip to the bottom of the quagmire wouldn't be in vain. But when he walked at the bottom of the quagmire, he suddenly felt like he was being watched by someone. It was as if someone was watching his movements in the dark. This attention wasn't from Miao or the shaman. Xiao Xian could tell that these two people were watching him. He could even feel that Miao and the shaman were watching him, but this third gaze wasn't from above. It was from the bottom of the quagmire. Xiao Xian peered through his eyelids and looked around him. There were more and more spots of light. Just in the area around him, there were no less than 20 ground eyes. However, most of them weren't bright enough to meet Xiao Xian's requirements. These ground eyes were at most high-quality ground eye stones. They didn't even have a universal eye. Xiao Xian couldn't see the entire quagmire. It wasn't big, but it wasn't small either. It wasn't big because it was small compared to some large natural lakes. It wasn't small because it was man-made. It was almost twice as big as the man-made lake at the foot of Yanjiao's main mountain. This was also why the Jing tribe had a large area but little land. The quagmire took up too much of the land. The further it was from Xiao Xian, the blurrier the spots of light became. In other words, even if there was a brighter spot of light, if it was too far away from Xiao Xian wouldn't be able to tell what kind of ground eye it was. It was just like looking at the stars at night. A dimmer star didn't mean it wasn't bright. It was just a matter of distance. Ground eyes weren't slow when swimming in the quagmire. The higher the level of the ground eye, the faster it could swim. Ground eyes were a special kind of animal. They could also sense the presence of humans. When Xiao Xian was walking, many of them noticed Xiao Xian. Some would quickly avoid him while others ignored him. But these gazes didn't give Xiao Xian a strong feeling. It was far less intense than the one in the dark. There was no murderous intent, no aggression, and no emotions. In the Jing quagmire, other than the ground eyes, there weren't any other dangerous beasts that could attack. Xiao Xian was guessing. If the gaze in the quagmire came from a ground eye, what level was it? He had already felt the universal eye, and it was even stronger than the universal eye. Was it a true ground eye? If it's a ground eye, why didn't he see it? Maybe he couldn't see its spot? Thinking up to this point, Xiao Xian looked in the direction of the gaze. The source of the gaze changed according to Xiao Xian's movements. Every time Xiao Xian was about to get close, it would quickly run away and maintain a certain distance from Xiao Xian. Within this distance, it wasn't easy for Xiao Xian to see what it really was. After tracking it a few times, Xiao Xian only locked onto one spot. But because of the distance, Xiao Xian didn't know how bright it was. He could only compare it to the other ground eyes and estimate that it was at least at the level of the universal eye. But because there were more and more light spots in the quagmire, it was easy for people to overlook it. Xiao Xian continued to chase after the light spot. If he lost it, he would rely on his intuition to determine the source of the gaze. After walking around the quagmire, Xiao Xian stepped on the steps at the bottom of the quagmire and popped his head up to breathe. After the suffocating feeling in his chest disappeared, Xiao Xian said to Wei and the others who were following him around the quagmire, "Later on, I might run a little too fast. You can loosen the rope." Although they didn't understand what Xiao Xian meant by running a little too fast, Wei and the others still loosened the rope. Normally, when the Jing people went into the quagmire, one end of the rope would be tied to the person going into the quagmire, and the other end would be tied to a wooden stake. The wooden stake was deeply embedded in the quagmire, and the part that was exposed above the ground was about 6 meters long. The other end of the rope was a third above the stake, and there was a basket on top of the stake. In the basket there was a large coil of straw rope. There were a total of 10 wooden stakes like this, and they were distributed in 10 different directions around the quagmire. In the past, when people went into the quagmire, they would only move in one direction. If they went beyond the designated area, the rope would easily get tangled at the bottom of the quagmire if there were too many people. After all, in the entire Jing tribe, other than the people with the third eye, everyone else had to rely on the rope to move. If the rope got tangled up, they would have a lot of trouble too. But now, only the Xiao Xian was going into the quagmire. The reason why he could move freely at the bottom of the quagmire was because the rope on his body wasn't fixed. Wei and the others were holding it, so when Xiao Xian moved at the bottom of the quagmire, they would follow him. Now Xiao Xian told Wei and the others to stop holding the rope. He also untied the rope on his body. If he ran around the quagmire, the rope might tie him up. The center of the quagmire was solid ground, just like an island in the middle of a lake. The center of the quagmire was piled up with rocks. That was where the Jing tribe's fire pit was located. When the Jing people encountered danger, they would go there to take refuge. So if the rope was tied up, Xiao Xian would be hindered if he wanted to chase after his target. Since they were sure that Xiao Xian wouldn't have a problem moving around at the bottom of the quagmire, the Yanjiao people didn't have to worry too much even if they untied the rope. They were even guessing if Xiao Xian could catch a universal eye. The Jing shaman, who was sitting in the same spot and watching the show, finally stood up. Because he was sitting in the same spot, he didn't see Xiao Xian's movements clearly. But he felt that Xiao Xian must have found something, or in other words, Xiao Xian already had a target. Was it that universal eye? No, it wasn't. The direction that Xiao Xian was chasing after the universal eye was very far away from it. The direction wasn't right, so it couldn't be that universal eye. Then did Xiao Xian find another universal eye? That wasn't right either. From what he saw just now, Xiao Xian also missed the other universal eyes. What was Xiao Xian chasing after? Because he didn't understand, the Jing shaman couldn't sit still anymore. He wanted to follow and see. Seeing the Jing shaman stand up, and hearing that the Yinjiao person was about to start catching ground eyes, the Jing people immediately became interested. They all followed behind the Jing shaman, wanting to see if that Yinjiao person could successfully catch the ground eyes. After Xiao Xian took a few deep breaths, he sank to the bottom of the quagmire. This time, without the rope pulling him, he didn't have to worry about going to the center of the quagmire, so he sped up. The night was getting darker. Outside the quagmire, it was as bright as day because of the moon. Everything on the ground could be seen clearly. More and more ground eyes appeared in the quagmire. The bright moon hung high in the sky, and they all seemed very excited. The people standing by the quagmire could see some ground eyes jumping out of the water. Because of their fast-spinning bodies, they threw mud onto the shore. Many people were splashed with bits of mud. It would be great if we had a net with a long handle, Duoli said. We have nets, but without the Jing shaman's permission, no one in the Jing tribe dares to do anything. Tuo pointed at the Jing people behind him with his mouth. Duoli looked over. As expected, many Jing people were eager to try, but they didn't dare to move without permission. Even if you have a net with a long handle, you won't be able to catch them. They're too fast, Wei said. The ground eyes that jumped out of the quagmire didn't jump high, but they were fast. They almost all disappeared in a flash, leaving behind splashes of mud. Duoli and the others were about to say something, but Wei suddenly said, "Stop talking, follow them." On the other side, the Jing shaman had already started running. It was obvious that the people at the bottom of the quagmire had also started moving. They couldn't see what was going on under the quagmire. After the Xiao Xian went down, they couldn't even sense the Xiao Xian's aura. If they were on the shore, they could only determine the Xiao Xian's position based on the movements of the Jing shaman. Therefore, these people who couldn't see what was going on under the quagmire could only follow the shaman. Soon there were obvious movements in the quagmire. This was because the people at the bottom of the quagmire were moving quickly, causing the mud to move with them. Running in the quagmire wasn't as convenient as running on the ground. Sometimes it even felt a little powerless. It wasn't as effective as running on the ground. However, after running one lap around the quagmire, the Xiao Xian also got the hang of it. He started to speed up from the second lap. Outside the quagmire, the Yinjiao people and the Jing people followed the Jing shaman and ran one lap around the quagmire. Then the second lap, the third lap. The eye between the Jing shaman's eyebrows was wide open, as if he was staring at something with all his might. The veins on his forehead bulged because he was staring too hard. The expression on his face became more and more complicated, more and more conflicted. After running the fourth lap around the quagmire with the shaman, some people couldn't hold it in anymore, especially the Yinjiao people. They looked at the Jing shaman with resentment. Three-eyed shaman, at least explain something. Can't you use your third eye to see what's going on under the quagmire? Can't you say something more? Why are you frowning and pretending to be deep? If the Jing shaman knew what everyone was thinking, he would definitely cry out for injustice. Because he couldn't understand what Xiao Xian was chasing. He could only see that Xiao Xian was chasing after something, but he couldn't tell what it was. There were indeed many ground eyes in the direction that Xiao Xian was chasing, but most of them were just ground eyes that contained ground eye stones. The Jing shaman thought that Xiao Xian would attack the universal eyes that were very close to him, but Xiao Xian ran in another direction, completely ignoring the universal eyes that were making noise. What was it? What was he chasing? Was there something that he couldn't see with his third eye? The Jing shaman was puzzled. It shouldn't be. While the Jing shaman was in a dilemma, in the Jing shaman's house, Miao also opened his third eye and looked at the quagmire. He couldn't go out and run, so he couldn't see everything. In the beginning, Miao was the same as the Jing shaman. He didn't understand what Xiao Xian was chasing, but after the second and third lap, Miao's face became more and more confused. He saw what Xiao Xian was chasing, but he wasn't sure what it was. Chapter 664. At the bottom of the swamp, Xiao Xian stared at the light spot. His totemic power surged crazily, and the muscles in his legs suddenly expanded. His body sank as he bent his legs, and then he rushed out quickly. His whole body was like a loach swimming in the mud at high speed, sliding towards his target. The mud in the quagmire vibrated and surged up. The people outside the quagmire could only see that the quagmire was constantly surging as if it was boiling, emitting a gurgling sound. The shaman, who could see Xiao Xian's movements at the bottom of the quagmire with his third eye, saw this scene and his face twitched. He had never seen anyone run like this in the quagmire. The quagmire was not like the ground. Although there was a pulling force in the quagmire that pulled people to the bottom, it was still not as convenient as on the ground. Even when he rushed out, there was still a delay in his descent. This was something that could not be changed. Because Xiao Xian knew this, he did not run in the quagmire. Instead, he leapt and sprinted. Every time he leapt, he would bend his leg to land on the bottom of the quagmire. Then he would use the momentum to propel himself forward at high speed. Every time he leapt, he would cover a distance of more than 10 meters. As Xiao Xian familiarized himself with this method, he became even faster. 10 meters, 15 meters, 20 meters. Every time he rushed out, the distance he covered in the mud would increase. The quagmire churned more and more violently with Xiao Xian's movements at the bottom of the quagmire. The shaman, who was still running at the edge of the quagmire, was sweating profusely. He really did not know how that kid could run so fast in the quagmire. He was like a fish in the water. If one only looked at Xiao Xian's movements, they would not think that he was moving in a quagmire. Moreover, it was close to the fire seat of a foreign tribe. His movements did not seem to be affected at all. This was unbelievable. When the shaman agreed to let Xiao Xian go down, he never thought that he would encounter such a situation. He thought that the kid was just curious and wanted to take a walk in the quagmire. The current situation was completely out of his expectations. Looking at how fast the kid was chasing, it was impossible for him to get to the shore. The Jing shaman quickly wiped the sweat off his forehead and continued to run. Even though he was tired of running, he was more conflicted than anything else. What was that brat chasing after? He couldn't tell, he still couldn't tell. At this time, Xiao Xian's every step caused the thick mud at the bottom of the swamp to vibrate violently. Many ground eyes no longer stayed at the bottom of the swamp in order to avoid the vibrations, and instead swam to the surface of the swamp. As a result, the people standing outside the quagmire noticed that more and more ground eyes were surging out of the water. Dong. With a muffled sound, the mud in the quagmire began to churn again as if someone was stirring it. The surface of the muddy water became even more turbid and viscous as it surged in one direction. Dong, dong, dong. Muffled sounds rang out one after another. Every sound was the sound of Xiao Xian taking a step forward. They were all produced when he stepped on the bottom of the pool. On the other side of the quagmire outside the Jing tribe, Dipai and Dipa of the Ye tribe had just run over to watch the Jing people catch the ground eyes when they heard the sounds coming from the center of the quagmire. Dipai and Dipa looked away from the people who were busy catching the ground eyes. Their ears twitched along with the vibrations coming from the ground. They tried to distinguish the source of the sound and the exact location of the vibrations. It wasn't coming from the ground? Who was it? This sound didn't sound like something the Jing people could make. The Jing people didn't have that much strength. The two of them were confused, but they still walked towards the center of the quagmire. Because the Jing people were very familiar with the Dipai and Dipa brothers, they didn't stop them when they saw them walking towards the center of the quagmire. However, the two brothers didn't get too close to the quagmire. The Jing fire seed's repulsion made them feel very uncomfortable. The closer they got, the more uncomfortable they felt. That was why they only stopped when they got a little closer to the quagmire. They squinted their eyes, trying to see what was going on over there. Unfortunately, their vision wasn't good enough, so they could only guess what was going on over there from the sounds. There are Yinjiao people over there. What are they doing? They could only feel a group of Yinjiao people and a group of Jing people running around the quagmire like idiots. They didn't know what they were doing, but the quagmire was also very noisy. What's down there? The Dipai and Dipa brothers put their ears to the ground and felt the vibrations coming from the ground. Every time there was a vibration, their ears would twitch quickly. The beards and hair on their faces would spread out like needles, sensing every tiny vibration in the air and ground. In the quagmire, the Xian stepped on the stairs again and popped his head out to take a breath. This time, the Jing shaman took the opportunity and asked, "What did you see?" "There's a ground eye. I feel like it's looking at me." "You said it before, the true eye is like an eye. It gives people a different feeling from other ground eyes." Before the Xian could finish, the Jing shaman interrupted him. "It can't be the true eye. If it was the true eye, he would have seen it a long time ago. There was no way he couldn't see it until now. You can't even see the true eye. Do you think I'm blind? Do you think I'm from the Ya tribe?" The Jing shaman didn't believe the Xian. If there was a true eye, it wouldn't be able to escape his third eye. The Xian didn't care and continued, "You also said that the higher the level of the ground eye, the faster it can move in the quagmire. That ground eye is faster than the universal eye." "Impossible." The Jing shaman denied again. He didn't see a single ground eye moving quickly in the quagmire. Not to mention the universal eye, he didn't even see a normal ground eye. There were so many ground eyes in the quagmire. If there was one moving at high speed, how could he miss it? Just as he was about to say something, the Jing shaman suddenly heard a low cough from the house. This place wasn't far from the house. The Jing shaman remembered that Mio was still in the house. He must have seen what happened just now, but why did he cough like that? Ever since Mio's injuries recovered, he never coughed again. Did Mio discover something and wanted to remind him? Because of Mio's low cough, the Jing shaman swallowed the words he was about to say. He changed the topic and said, "If it really is the true eye, you won't be able to catch it." "Only I can catch it." The Jing shaman pointed at his third eye. Catching the true eye is actually a competition of eyes. Even in the past, when the Jing people caught the true eye, it was with the help of the shaman. You can't do it. Even if you use a net, you won't be able to catch the true eye. You can't compete with it in terms of speed. How about this? Let me rest for a while, then I'll go down and catch it with you. The Xian thought for a while and nodded. "Then you rest first. I'll try again. If it doesn't work, then we'll discuss how to work together." The Jing shaman wanted to go to the house and ask Mio what he found, but the Xian had already sunk to the bottom of the quagmire. The Jing shaman could only look at the quagmire again. This time he wanted to take a good look at the ground eye moving quickly in the quagmire. When the Xian sank to the bottom of the quagmire, the ground eye was quietly watching him from afar, but the Jing shaman couldn't see it. The Xian thought about the few times he chased the ground eye. The quagmire didn't pose much of a hindrance to the ground eye. Instead, it helped them move faster in the quagmire. Every time he almost caught up with the ground eye, but the distance between them was enough for the ground eye to widen again. After all, the ground eyes that lived underground and in the quagmire didn't need to come out of the water to breathe, but the Xian needed to. Even though totemic warriors could hold their breath for longer than normal people, the intense consumption of energy would shorten this time. The Jing shaman couldn't see it, but the Xian had been chasing it for so long. In fact, he was 80% sure that it was the ground eye. The Jing shaman had said that it wasn't easy for the true eye to appear. If he was wrong, he might have to wait even longer. Naturally, the Xian wouldn't let go of this opportunity so easily. Even if it was proven that it wasn't the true eye, the Xian still wanted to try. It was better than missing it and regretting it later. Using a net wouldn't work and speed wouldn't work either. Then he changed his method. The Jing shaman saw that the Xian was using the same method again to chase in a certain direction. He quickly opened his eyes wide and looked in that direction. He couldn't help but stand up and follow in that direction. While he was looking for his target with his eyes wide open, the Jing shaman was still complaining in his heart. It was the same old trick again. Even if there really was the true eye, using this method wouldn't work. It would just be a waste of energy. The muffled thumping sounds came from the bottom of the pool, and the quagmire surged again. The people who saw this were the same as the Jing shaman. They thought that what happened next would be the same as before, but they soon realized that they were wrong. The Xian was indeed using the leaping method to chase, but as he got closer and closer to the light spot, he was about to reach the surface of the pool to take a breath. Every time he was the closest to the target, he would suddenly rush towards the stairs at the bottom of the pool. His leg, which had accumulated power, kicked hard at the bottom of the pool, making a thumping sound. His body broke through the mud and pushed forward. When he reached the stairs, his other leg landed on the stairs. However, just as the Jing shaman thought that Xian was going to step on the stairs to take a breath, the Xian didn't stop. Instead, he suddenly stepped on the stairs. Thump. Another muffled sound rang out. It was even more muffled than the previous few times, like a heavy hammer hitting the ground. Everyone who heard this sound felt their hearts tremble. At the bottom of the pool, the stone stairs at the bottom of the pool that Xiao Xian had stepped on sank. Large amounts of mud rose up from the vibrations. Xiao Xian's rapidly advancing figure was like a battle knife cutting through the mud. A series of bubbles appeared behind him because he was moving too quickly, making popping sounds. However, Xiao Xian didn't rush towards the target like before. Although he was still facing the target, his body was slanted upwards. At the same time he raised his arm, clenched his fist and swung his arm. The moment his head emerged from the mud, Xiao Xian's raised arm brought up the mud in the quagmire. It was like the dorsal fin of a ferocious shark in the sea. The Jing shaman's eyelids twitched. He had a feeling that something bad was going to happen. Thump. Xiao Xian's raised arm turned into a heavy hammer at this moment, and slammed it onto the surface of the pool. A powerful force instantly broke open the surface of the pool. Where Xiao Xian's arm landed, the vibrations split the water and broke the waves. The mud was pushed away and ripples spread in all directions, forming a rapidly expanding depression. The mud was like a blooming black lotus, tumbling and exploding. The mud at the bottom of the pool was sent flying by the vibrations, splashing out of the surface of the pool. Many of the ground eyes that were swimming on the surface of the quagmire were also blown out of the water. The wet mud was flung out by the ground eyes that were sent flying, sweeping towards the shore like raindrops. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.